Mayor, just trying to get your attention.
You didn't know what we were telling you. Big flag.
Evelyn.
This book.
This one. I guess we're it. I'll call this meeting to order for, where are we at? Monday, May 6, 2024. This is a special budget hearing workshop of the Alamogordo City Commission. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Susan Payne,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sharon McDonald,
Here.
Commissioner Mark Tapley,
Here.
Commissioner Josh Reardon,
Here.
Commissioner Stephen Burnett is not here, Commissioner Warren Robinson,
Here.
Commissioner Nick Paul,
Here.
City Manager Rick Holden,
Here.
City Attorney Ashley Smith.
Here.
The clerk is present. Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to start with the invocation given by our city clerk, Rachel Hughes, and our pledge led by Mayor Pro Tem McDonald.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer. We thank you, dear Lord, for another day of life, and I ask that you be with our governing body as they go through the budget hearings, dear Lord, and that you will make the city government good stewards of the money that you give to us. And dear Lord, we also ask for those that are going through very severe weathers right now with tornadoes, dear God, as well as fires in other areas of the country. We ask that you be with them, dear Lord, and we thank you for the blessings that you give to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Okay. We are going to start with the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
A motion from Mayor Pro Tem McDonald. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Commissioner Robinson. All those in favor, aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes 6-0. We're going to move into our work session, City of Alamogordo preliminary budget for fiscal year 2023, and our Finance Director, Evelyn Hupp, is going to give us some information to start us off.
All right. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, City Manager, we are here tonight to present to you the preliminary FY25 budget. So we have a PowerPoint that we're going to run through. You guys will bring that up for me. So this budget was developed with the help of the entire city, but tonight the main presenters are Mr. Holden, the city manager, myself, and then I have Maurice Gutierrez, our budget analyst, here to assist. So we're going to have a short city manager introduction because I didn't tell him he was supposed to do that. So we're going to do some impromptu city manager introductions.
Was I supposed to do that?
This afternoon? Budget adoption timeline. We're going to go through a budgeting 101 that we haven't done in several years, especially for our newer commissioners. So that'll be fun. we're going to go over all the funds combined. We're going to go per fund. We have a short gross receipts tax overview, and we're going to talk about our approved capital and positions. So I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Holden and test his impromptu skills. Do you just want to introduce the budget a little bit?
Oh, absolutely.
I feel like he can handle this, but.
You talk about getting a surprise. That's about the best surprise I've seen all day. I want to tell you, first of all, that this staff that you have that has been here before me is actually phenomenal. In case you didn't know, thank you. The budget process began, it had already started when I got here, but we have been working diligently to get a budget put together. It's involved everybody on our staff. Evelyn has done a tremendous job as the finance director, and I will tell you from experience that I've had in other cities and around, I have personally not seen a budget process better than how this one operates. And this is with a complete new financial accounting system that we're utilizing for the first time. So it's been a phenomenal process. I think we've put together a budget for you that will represent fairly the needs, the wants of our community, and certainly we hope for the commission. I will tell you, as always, every budget I've ever dealt with, we try hard to balance budgets, and there is, without a doubt, a demand for more expenses than we have revenue to support the expenses. And so I did go through several red pens personally while we went through that process, and departments were very good about coming back in and cutting their original request to numbers that we could balance. That included the city manager's office, who cut his budget accordingly, just like everybody else was asked to do. I'm not going to spend more time with this because I want Evelyn to get right into it, because I know that most of you would like to stay here for 3 full nights doing this, but we're going to try to get it done in one night if we can. But a lot of that's going to be up to you and to the questions that you address to us. We will go from here and go back and sharpen pens and pencils and erasers and whatever we need to do to incorporate the input that the commission gives us tonight. But we have put together a budget that we believe to be a very good FY25 operating budget. So with that, unless you have specific questions, I will sit down and be quiet. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so our timeline, obviously, tonight we're here at the public hearings. We have these scheduled throughout the week if necessary. Once we go from there and we've developed the preliminary budget that we want to send to DFA, we will bring that to you on May 28th at your regular commission meeting. That is due to DFA no later than June 1st, 2024. After that, as you all know, we will do our year-end closing, get our actual beginning fund balances, do our cash, everything like that, and we will present the FY25 final budget at the regular commission meeting on July 23rd, if everybody cooperates. We receive a lot of financial statements from a lot of different places, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So as you all are aware, sometimes we do have to call a special meeting in that last week of July, just depending on where we're at, especially as City Manager Holden says, we're dealing with a brand new accounting system, so we're learning every day. So the final budget is due to DFA no later than July 31st, 2024. So no matter what, we have to have you all vote on the final budget before July 31st, 2024. All right, Budgeting Finance 101. So I'm going to try very hard not to get into the accounting weeds here, as I can do very easily. So if for some reason I am in those weeds, just give me a little nudge. But let's talk about what makes up a budget and how does each part affect the whole. So there's 5 parts to every budget. Beginning cash, your revenues add in, your transfers in and out, transfers add into your beginning cash, transfers out, take out from your beginning cash, expenditures subtract, and our ending product is our ending cash. That is what we are always trying to get to. So that budgeting formula is the one that we live and die by, and you'll see multiple times come up throughout the course of this evening. Beginning cash plus revenue plus transfers in minus transfers out minus expenditures equals that ending cash. So let's talk about your beginning cash. So this is the cash that we have in the bank at the beginning of the fiscal year. This is calculated by finance, obviously, because we receive all of the bank statements, we reconcile all the bank accounts. The amount that we're presenting to you tonight is an estimate. So we're taking what we estimate the ending cash balance from FY24. So that's assuming that we receive every dollar we budgeted and that we spend every dollar we budgeted. As we all know, that's not the way life works. Sometimes we receive less, sometimes we spend less, sometimes we end up having to spend more. So we're taking that initial estimate from FY24 and we're making that our FY25 beginning cash. A lot of times we get asked by the departments about, well, how much is in my bank account? So we don't have a separate bank account for every fund. We have, over 100 funds. We don't have 100 bank accounts. So all of this is part of our consolidated cash. So we reconcile our consolidated cash at least on a monthly basis, but usually it's more like a weekly basis. We're going in there, we're checking, we're making sure that everything lines up and that we can not only cover the checks that we have written that week or that month, but that we can cover any of the expenditures that we have budgeted for in the future. So on that, beginning cash can never be negative. We can never borrow from ourselves. So we can't say, okay, Fund 15 is going to start with a negative cash balance, but we know that Fund 11 isn't starting with a negative cash balance, so that's okay because it's positive. That's not okay. Each individual fund cannot have a negative beginning cash balance. So the question is, can the commission departments change the beginning cash? No. This number is very finite. This is the number that is in the bank at the beginning of the fiscal year. So we take your beginning cash, which is our beginning number, and we add on to it our revenues. So the revenues are all sources of income received by the city that is available and ready for use. So that's a little bit of a misnomer when it comes to public finance because we're modified accrual. So modified accrual is when we create an invoice, so say we're going to charge you $300,000 for tearing down your hotel that's burned down. We're going to create an invoice for $300,000. That is counted as revenue, even if we never receive a dollar of that $300,000 because we're modified accrual. So while many times we show revenue, we have to show it because we've billed it, we probably have never gotten a dollar from that particular revenue. So it's very different from private industry where, you're running a business and you're booking on a cash basis. This is your cash coming in. This is the way. Government finance is a little bit different. So our revenues, while sometimes they look fantastic, we also have to remember that that's why it's tempered with our cash because we don't always receive the money that we've booked in revenues. So obviously taxes are a huge part. We're going to see that a little bit further when we start talking about our funds combined. But of course, usage fees and any grant income and any other income that we can have, we need to make sure is included in our budget. All sources of revenue must be included and realistically projected. This is a big one that we push to the departments. When City Manager Holden was talking about our budget process, this is something we discuss frequently with the departments. Do not overstate or understate your revenues. If you come in, if you think you're going to make $300,000, you better be able to prove why you think you're going to be able to make $300,000. Because if last year you only made $100,000, you got to prove to me why it's going to go up. So we're very careful with the departments about being realistic with their projections and also with our finance projections ourselves. Revenues can never be negative. If they're negative, it's an expenditure. It needs to be moved to the expenditure. So how do revenues affect the cash balance? Well, we talked about this just a minute ago. The revenues increase the cash balance because it's considered cash coming in. And so can you as commissioners and departments increase or decrease the revenues? Absolutely. Because revenues can be increased by increasing fees, increasing usage, receiving new grants. Decreases decreasing fees, cutting funding, loss of facility. So you'll see that all the time. Our revenues, as much as we like them to have a continually upward trajectory, like when we look at the GRT in a couple hours, we're going to see that it, kind of rocks along. Now, of course, the increasing fees, that usually is a determination of the departments, along with the commission, to figure out, what is the best way to help offset our expenditures, but also still keep things affordable for the community. Transfers in and out. This is something that we deal with a ton in finance, but the departments don't see very often. And for you guys up there on the dais, this is actually kind of a really important part that gets lost a little bit. So transfers in and out subsidize departments or functions that do not generate enough revenue or do not generate enough to be self-sustaining. So my favorite example of this is if you call the police department, you don't want the police officer to say, okay, I'll come out to your house, but I'm going to need your credit card number first because it's going to be a $300 charge just to come out to your house. The police do not generate enough revenue to cover their department or to be self-sustaining. It's just the way it's going to be. That's the way it works. The same thing, unfortunately, with our parks department or with our rec center. That pool is incredibly expensive to operate, as you all know, as you've all heard over the years. So we're not going to be able to charge people $150 to go swimming for 2 hours. So they're going to need some sort of subsidization. In this case, almost all of our subsidization comes from gross receipts tax, either from the general fund gross receipts tax or from gross receipts tax that is deposited into other funds that have been passed for certain reasons. Another great example is the streets department. The streets department is not out there charging people to drive on the streets. We don't have toll roads. We don't have those. But we do have a gross receipts tax that is dedicated to paying for the maintenance and the upkeep of the streets. So transfers are highly regulated, and that's one of the reasons that they're entered by finance, especially when we're talking about dedicated gross receipts tax and what that can be used for. That's a conversation that's going to come in front of you guys more and more often here as we start looking at some of our older dedications and trying to decide if they still meet today's current needs. So can the commission departments increase or decrease the transfers in and out? My favorite answer, yes and no. Departments can request to receive a transfer in from another fund, but it's subject to regulations and approval. So as you're going to see when we get into talking about our subsidized departments, we make an initial transfer in to be able to balance, to be able to make sure that they don't have a negative cash balance. But there are situations where we do transfers in to pay for a piece of equipment, to pay for a certain project, to pay debt service. So you're going to see all of those different transfers in and out. Expenditures. The biggest part of our budget by far draws the most attention. These are charges against the budget for goods and services received. Our biggest one, salaries and benefits, takes up almost 50% of our budget. But of course, there's a ton of other expenditures, supplies, training, travel. Expenditures are classified as either operating or capital. You're going to see this a lot and have seen it a lot in past revisions that we brought to you. Operating expenditures are consumable goods and services that are not going to become part of a fixed asset and are under $5,000. Capital expenditures are usually over $5,000 or something that's going to become part of an asset. So that's why they're seen separately, as they're accounted for separately in the accounting system. And then also capital expenditures are a huge deal because usually they're a very large amount of money and come with a lot of different strings. So like we talked about, expenditures are the largest part of the budget. So they draw the most attention from everybody, including the public, because they see that as cash out, they see it as cash being spent. We also talk very strongly with the departments about making sure that they're realistically projected for both ways. It does not help the departments to project your operating expenditures extremely low. There are some departments that will do that because they think they're helping out the cause or doing it, but what happens is middle of the year they can no longer operate, or they can no longer buy the things that they need, and we're doing revisions and we're trying to figure it out. Same things about projecting your department's expenses unnecessarily high. That ties up available cash and it causes us to be able to have to make decisions that maybe would have gone a different way if it wasn't tying up cash. So we talk a great deal with the departments about being very realistic. As we all know, there's been a lot of price increases over the last 4 years, and that's changed a lot of the department's operating expenses. So how do expenditures affect the cash balance? We talked about that. They decrease from it because it's cash going out. So can the commission or departments increase or decrease expenditures? Absolutely. Expenditures can be increased by price increases, new expenditures, new employee costs. Decreases come from cutting expenses. I leave price decreases on there, but we know that never happens. But you can also freeze or eliminate positions. Expenditures are easier to influence than revenues. So it's a lot easier for a department to come in and say, okay, well, I'm going to buy one less carton of widgets this year, and so that's going to decrease my expenditures, than necessarily it is to increase revenues. Increasing revenues, as you all know, we've been going through the process, just recently looking at our water rates. That's a process. Anytime you start affecting those things, especially if they pass on to the customers, it becomes a longer process than going to your expenditures. However, your expenditures more greatly impact the operation of your departments. So it's one of those never-ending circles. You can cut one, but it's going to hurt the other. Expenditures can be tied to revenues if you're buying something to sell or if you're offering a service. So if we discontinue a program or a product, we have to make sure that not only do we take out the expenditure, but we also take out the revenue. So that's something, again, we counsel departments on a lot is, okay, you might be decreasing your expenditure because you're no longer going to buy these t-shirts that you sell, but you also have to remember that you're no longer going to have that revenue from those sales as well. So ending cash balance, the whole point of everything that we've talked about up to now is getting to our ending cash balance. So like we talked about, our budget formula, beginning cash plus revenues plus transfers, minus transfers out, minus expenditures, is all about getting to ending cash balance. It can never be a negative number. So what City Manager Holden was talking about earlier is we started the process. We basically gave the departments not quite a blank check, but a pretty nice check, and said, tell us what you want, what you need to operate. We came back, we reviewed those numbers in the city manager director meetings, and then we put them in our budget formula. And if at the end of your fund there was a red number, then we came back to you and said, okay, you got to cut until we get that to either be zero or we get it to be a black number, because it cannot be a negative number. In some cases, there is a minimum cash balance that has to be kept at all times. So for example, the landfill right now is required to keep about $2.1 million in reserve. So even if the landfill comes back and they have a positive number, that's great. But if it's not at least $2.1 million, they have to go back and cut, or they have to go back and relook at their revenue numbers, because by state requirements, they have to keep so much in reserve. So can commission departments increase or decrease the ending cash balance? Absolutely. It can be increased or decreased by all of the different things that we've talked about so far. So you can affect it by your revenues, your expenditures, and even your transfers in and out if you decide to subsidize something from a fund different than a general fund, if you can pay for something with a gross receipts tax, some capital that doesn't have to come out of the general funds. The ending cash balance for this year becomes next year's beginning cash balance. So this is probably the number one rule of accounting, other than credits and debits have to equal each other. Is whatever your ending cash balance was becomes your next one. So the idea of each year lives individually is kind of a misnomer, because what the decisions that are made in FY24 that affect that ending cash balance, those decisions affect FY25, because if that ending cash balance goes down, then that's less cash that you have available for the next fiscal year. So once we have all the pieces put together, it's time to make the decisions. So we use that budget formula day in and day out to determine the requests that we get from departments to move funding from one place to another. We use it to determine if there's enough fund balance. If there is fund balance, this has to go to the commission for approval. So every month when you see those budget revisions that come on the agenda, those are coming on the agenda because they affect the fund balance. You are being asked to use more of your ending cash and move that into an expenditure category. Or sometimes there's a nice offsetting revenue, which makes it great. Neither management nor the commission will ever approve something that can create a negative cash balance, because management will never bring you something that will create a negative cash balance. Because on the flip side of that, even if it were somehow to get approved, which it never would, we could not send that to DFA. So everything that we do, every single solitary budget thing that we do, even if it's just moving $1 from one fund to another, has to be submitted to DFA and has to be approved by DFA. And they have a software that you put all the numbers in there, and there's this beautiful little red bar that comes up at the top that says you have negative cash balances. You have to go fix your upload. So, DFA won't even let you submit it with a negative cash balance. So are there any questions? I know that was a really quick rundown of budgeting, but I hope that it helps explain some of the topics that we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of the night. All right, see, I didn't get too far in the accounting weeds. We didn't get too far into modified accrual accounting. All right, so let's talk about the FY25 budget. So here are our projections for FY24. This is
Can I stop you for just
Sure,
1 second?
absolutely.
If you're, for new commissioners, you might be trying to follow in the book. So I'm trying to.
This isn't, we're not to the book yet. We're
And-
still
and
just
I
on the
knew that,
PowerPoint.
But if you could let us know when you
Sure.
get to that,
I absolutely will.
so that they're not like,
Yeah, we are just on the PowerPoint right now.
Okay.
Okay, so FY24 is the fiscal year that we're in. So as you can see, our beginning fund balance was 92.9 million. We've got our revenues, our transfers, our expenditures. We're expecting an ending fund balance of 63.6. Now, I just gave you guys a lecture about how your ending fund balance becomes your beginning fund balance for the next year. You'll notice that those don't match. That is because we have a carryover adjustment in our capital outlay account for our state projects. We received a bunch of money right at the beginning of the fiscal year that we normally would not have received. It would have been great if they had gotten it to us before June 30th, so it was in FY23. So it's creating kind of a weird little fund balance thing that we don't want to keep carrying over. So a little bit of an accounting correction there. So in FY25, we're expecting to start the year with 63.1 million. Our revenues, again, we are extremely conservative on the budgeting side. We'll talk about that here a little bit when we talk about revenues, but we're very conservative, so we are only projecting 67.4 million. We have our transfers in, our transfers out, and we're projecting $64 million in expenditures. So that gives us an estimated ending fund balance of 66.5 million. So as you can see, there's a little second from the bottom, little row that says reserves. So like we talked about earlier, the state of New Mexico requires us to keep 1/12 of our fund balance in the general fund in reserve at all times. We carry higher than 1/12 because we also reserve 1/12 of all of our subsidized funds. So by doing that, we're basically saying we can operate the general fund for a month, and we can also operate all of the funds that we subsidize with the general fund for a month. And then we also carry some additional reserves for some of our debt service that's paid for out of GRT. So we're more conservative than the state requires us to be on our reserves. Okay, so let's talk about our revenue assumptions. So these are the same assumptions we've been using for a couple years now. Our gross receipts tax, we assume a 3-year average with no increase assumed. So we take our 3-year average, we take what we've got, and that's what we project for FY25. We are not in the business of trying to go out there and forecast if the economy is going to go up, if the economy is going to go down. It's a little bit too dangerous of a game to play for us, and we don't do it. Property tax, DFA provides us with a formula sheet, and we assume a 95% collection rate on all of our property tax. Franchise fees, we don't project any growth for our franchise fees. Charges for services, these are projected by the departments that actually charge those. They know if they have any automatic risers coming up, and they also know what their usage levels are like. Investment income, this is looking really good for us right now. Interest rates are high. We've been keeping quite a bit of money invested, so our investment incomes looks really good. And then, of course, grants vary completely based on how successful we're being with the applications, how successful we're being with recruitments. So most of the time, we do not project those into the next fiscal year because we do not budget a grant until we actually have the signed notice of award in hand. We don't do it based on, hey, we put in an application, we feel really good about this. We need to have the signed application in hand. So also, if we have grants in FY24 that will not be completed by June 30th, we bring those back in July as part of the carryover process, as part of the final budget process. So here are our revenues. As you can see, taxes are at the top because taxes are extremely important. And then from there, we also have fees and permits. We have our state share taxes, which is the portion that we get back from the state from the 5% that they charge on the gross receipts tax. Our user fees are making a push. We are getting closer with our user fees to some of our tax revenue. And then we have a bunch of smaller revenue sources. I did want to point out our investment income. So like I said, investment, interest rates are high right now. And so we're seeing, almost a double from last year is what we're expecting for FY25. So how does that look in my favorite little pie chart? So again, I wanted to point out if you take the bright green wedge and you take the teal wedge and you add them together, that is our tax revenue. So that makes up 50% of the entire revenue for the whole city. So those are extremely important, our gross receipts tax and then the state shared fees that we get. But like I said, you'll notice user fees is kind of making a push there. That's the red wedge. And then everything else kind of fills in. Major revenues by year. So this is just showing us, so this is our taxes, our state shared fees, and our user fees. So as you can see, the red bar is our proposed budget for FY25. I like this graph because it illustrates that we're not going super far away from trends. We're not moving way out of the path of, we're not assuming a whole bunch of tax increases or that somehow the state's going to give us more of the shared taxes. We do have an increase in the user fees, and part of that comes from some reprojections that we've done with the new software that's given us a little bit more of a boost. So are there any questions on revenues, how we get them, how we figure anything, project them?
I have a question,
Sure.
actually. More of a clarification, just so we're clear. Can you please tell us what our percentage of property tax is that we receive? Do you know that?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the formula. Did you bring the formula?
I just want to make sure that everybody understands that all those property taxes that the assessor collects do not go to the city of Alamogordo, even though those
No,
properties are in the
they don't.
city. Right.
They
So I
don't.
want to make sure
We
that
get
we're
a certain
clear.
allocation. We can look that up and bring that, or
Okay.
and email it to everybody too.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
just for everybody that's listening,
You wanna get
because
the
I
form?
noticed that you threw property taxes in there, and there's always that, well, I pay your taxes
Yeah.
thing, and that's from the property
Maurice
taxes.
will run to
so-
his office and grab the form
Okay,
that we
yeah.
have from DFA. That
So I
shows
think
us.
it's really important that the public understands that we get very little, in the grand scheme of things, we as a city get very little of that share of the property tax.
Sure. And our property tax is spread over two funds. So we do deposit some of it into our general fund for operating, but the majority of it goes into our GO bond debt service fund.
Right.
Any other revenue questions?
You said user fees are up a little bit. Give us an example why they may be up.
So we're rebounding really well finally from COVID. So the rec center is seeing additional participation in their programs. The zoo is seeing really good attendance. But user fees also includes the water rates. So this also includes the majority of what's in user fees is the charges for water from Fund 81.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Evelyn, can you, what's in miscellaneous revenue? Like what comprises that line?
Sure. So miscellaneous revenue is our reimbursements and refunds, our donations, sale of scrap. Those are really the biggest ones. The other thing that is in there that tends to make it a little bit larger is we do get some billing. So like, for example, when we do an abatement of a house and we tear the abatement of the house down, that is in miscellaneous revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I didn't mean to give you a gotcha question.
No, you're fine. That one I
really
was like,
wanted-
ooh, property tax. But we have a really cool form, and that's why we do this in City Hall, so we can run to our office and get it.
Yeah, that does help, instead of the fire station.
Instead of the fire station. All right, let's talk about expenditures. So like we talked about, expenditures are the largest portion of the budget. For FY24, we're looking at $103 million of expenditures. The majority of those are, the operating portion of those are in salaries and benefits at 28.1. Obviously, capital outlay at 37.1 is a huge number. Those are our capital projects, including everything that is funded in-house, everything that is grant funded, and everything that is funded through the state legislature money. So as you can see, if we move over to FY25, that shows a huge decrease in the expenditures. The expenditures moved to $64 million. However, a good portion of that decrease, almost all of it, is the $32 million decrease in capital. So what that comes from is so many of these capital projects are very rarely completed in one fiscal year. Most of the time, they have to be rolled over. And for the example, for those of you who went on the Bonito Lake tour on Friday, we rolled those capital expenditures over for 11 years. So there are projects in here that are budgeted and will continue to just kind of move through their process, including, we have the CDBG project that is kind of coming to its end. So that's one, hopefully we won't have to carry over a lot. But then on the other side, we have the Great Blocks project, which is just starting. And that's a $3.4 million project that definitely is going to have a large portion of it carried over. All right, so let's look at our salaries and benefits in a pie chart, or our expenditures in a pie chart. So salaries and benefits, as usual, makes up the major portion of our expenditures. Last year, it was 45%. This year is 43%, so not a huge change. Services is the next largest portion, but as you can see, everything else all kind of comes together to create, we expect to see, obviously, an increase in our debt service. As we've talked about with the natatorium project and some of the water projects coming on, we're going to see that one grow quite a bit. But the departments have been very diligent at looking at all of their other classifications to see if there's anything that fits. So expenditures by category, this is kind of similar to the revenue bar graph. We wanted to show you kind of where we sit in the trends. So as you can see with the salaries and benefits, it took a substantial move in FY24. Part of that was the salary and compensation study. Part of that was the change in the police officers' pay scales that you all approved. Everything else has pretty much been tracking the blue bar on services for FY24. So we have a lot of services right now that we're working on, various different master plans, various different designs for capital projects. And it seems like everything we've been doing is like at least 200,000. It's 200,000, then it's 300,000, then it's 500,000. And so before you know it, I mean, that adds up to $1 million pretty quick. So you'll see a good portion of that services bar is going to be carried over to FY25 to handle some of that carryover stuff. And then also, you see that there's an increase in services in FY25. That's a big shift of ours, trying to get into where we're pre-planning stuff, we're getting stuff ready so that it's shovel-ready, it's signed, and utilizing the services so that we can have things a little bit more prepared, not quite so much off the cuff.
Okay,
Speaking
hold
of
that-
off the cuff.
Hold that thought for just 1 second. Can we let the record reflect that Commissioner Burnett just joined us? He must have another job, too. Speaking of budget, no, I'm just kidding, anyway. Okay, yes. Did you get that, Rachel? Okay, very good.
Okay. Is the debt service, okay. So on the property tax, so our residential operational property tax, we get .005 is our mill. So that's per thousand of assessed value. So really, I mean, we get 0.005% of every $1,000 that your property is valued for.
Okay,
And then on the debt, we're at .0017.
okay,
So, and again, that's a mill levy, so it's every 1,000 of appraised value.
right. So in the grand scheme of things, we really don't get,
So we
That
receive, our property tax for the operating, we get $3.7 million a year, and for the debt service, we get $1.1 million. So out of all of the property tax collected in the county, we receive, or we're budgeted to receive for FY25, $4.8 million.
so out of that, I'm sorry, I want to.
Sure.
So
if we
out of
can-
that,
If we go back to taxes, so out of the
Right.
26.8 million, 4.8 of that is property
is property
tax.
tax and the rest is GRT?
And the rest
or-
is GRT.
Got it, okay, perfect. I think that hopefully people will understand.
There any other questions on the property tax stuff? And if you have any questions on that afterwards, you can always let myself or Maurice know.
Thank you.
All right, so back to expenditures by category. You can see the FY22 bar on debt service is obviously much larger. That is when we refinanced those loans to get a better interest rate on them. So that makes it look like we paid a bunch of them off and we had to pay a bunch of debt service. But obviously where we are for FY24 and FY25 is much closer. And then just like we talked about with the capital, a bunch of that blue bar is going to move down and become part of the red bar whenever we do the carryovers for the projects that aren't completed at the end of the fiscal year. So are there any questions on expenditures? And we will go over expenditures obviously a lot more in detail when we go over each individual fund and each individual department. But this
Anybody
is
have
just
any
kind of
questions?
overarching expenditure questions.
Okay. Oh, we're good.
Okay. All right, transfers out. So this is a new slide for us this year. It's the little things that make you happy. So these are the transfers out. So as you can see, Fund 11 is probably one of the, well, it's definitely the biggest transfer out. So for FY24, Fund 11 transfers out $12 million. It's projected for FY25 to transfer out $11.9 million. So Fund 11, where the majority of our tax revenue is deposited, subsidizes a significant amount of funds, and we will look at that on the next slide. But as you can see, we do a lot of other transfers out as well, including 42, which is probably one of the next bigger ones. 42 is the gross receipts tax that is passed to fund the maintenance of the streets and drainage. So that money comes out of 42 and it goes into Fund 44. As you notice, Fund 81 transfers money out. This is the water sewer fund. It transfers a lot of its money out for debt service, but a lot of this is also transferred out to pay for internal services, which we'll see. And then I also wanted to highlight Fund 109. This is the gross receipts tax fund for capital street improvements. So this also transfers out money to pay for projects in Fund 44 that are eligible to be paid for with that gross receipts tax, but it also pays quite a bit of debt service as well. So these are the transfers in. So you'll notice the bright green bar is Fund 11. So Fund 12, which is the Internal Service Fund, Fund 15, which is the Corrections, Fund 16 and 20, which are Promotions and the Civic Center Fund, Fund 27, which is Municipal Court, Fund 32, which is Leisure Services, Community Services, Fund 71, the Senior Center, Fund 90, which is the golf course, and Fund 91, which is the airport. All of those are very heavily subsidized by the general fund, because you can tell that by their green bars. Some of them, that's all they get is a green bar. You'll see on Fund 12, there's also additional bars like the yellow one, that's Fund 81. So that's the water sewer fund, and that just shows you the proportion of what they fund in the internal services. And the internal services are things like facility maintenance, fleet maintenance, personnel, purchasing, all of those services that are not used by the outside public, but are essential for the city to be able to operate. If you look at Fund 44, you'll notice it kind of has that brown bar. That all is Fund 42. So the operations of Fund 44, which is the street maintenance fund, are funded by a gross receipts tax coming out of Fund 44. And then if we look at Fund 59, which is one of our debt service funds, you can see that that's broken up in between three different funds. That comes out of Fund 69, it comes out of a little bit out of 42, and then also some out of 109. If we transition to Fund 82, you notice we have the yellow bar and we kind of have the turquoise bar. So that is our water debt. So the majority of our water debt is paid for with a transfer out of Fund 81 and a transfer out of Fund 49. Fund 49 is another one of those gross receipts tax funds that we've been talking about all night that is dedicated to be able to pay some debt service. So you'll notice we have a lot of funds that receive either capital transfers, operating transfers, or debt transfers from a bunch of different funds, but mostly from the general fund. Any questions on transfers? We haven't really talked about transfers a lot in the past, but I think they're becoming more and more important. All right. So now we get into the nitty-gritty. This is where we're going to transition from the PowerPoint for you guys to your books, either your hard copy books or to the agenda books that you have on your computer. So the first fund type that we're going to talk about is the general fund, and that is going to be the first tab with a pretty title picture of a neighborhood, which you guys can thank Maurice for the pretty title pictures. I would give you probably blank white pages. He's much more artistic than I am. All right, so we've been talking a lot about Fund 11, and this is just a quick list of the departments that we're going to talk about in Fund 11, which we'll get into those as we get further into your books. And just something else to let you know, these definitions of the funds, they come directly from DFA. So some of them some of them are a little goofy. General fund's pretty straightforward, but when we get into special revenue, we're going to bounce around a little bit. So this is the recap of Fund 11. So the top recap is where we are for FY 2024. As you can see, we're starting the year with $15.4 million in our beginning cash balance. That's the number we can't change. It's solid. We're expecting to end the year with $7.5 million, which is the number that we're bringing down for our next. You'll notice that we're projected to end the year with $3.4 million with a reserve requirement of 1.8, which would leave us with an adjusted ending balance of 1.6. This is a little bit lower than we've had in the last couple of years. I think part of this has to do with the increase in operating expenses that the departments have seen, the increases in prices, and that's not just the departments in the general fund, that's the departments across all of those different funds. So it's definitely something that we're monitoring. It's one of the reasons you'll see when we get to capital, our capital list isn't huge because we weren't very comfortable with funding a whole bunch of capital out of the general fund. So we're going to talk about the revenues. That's on page 6 in your budget book, is the summary of the revenues out of the general fund. So as you can see, we're projecting $24.5 million in revenues for the general fund, with the two biggest shares being our gross receipts tax and our state share tax. The fees for the general fund are any of the other fees that are collected. The animal control fees are in here. Some of the other fees that are collected through accounts receivable are also in here. The fines is something that I need to point out. The fines are the fines that are collected through municipal court. These have been steadily decreasing. We are currently working on a project to look at all of the municipal court fines and bring that ordinance back to you all for review, because as many of you know, the state statute has changed, and a lot of the state mandated fees are no longer going to be in effect on July 1st. So municipal court, they no longer have to charge like the automation fee and the judicial education fee and some of these others. So kind of in that though, what the state came back and said is, well, you can still have these fees, but you just need to change their names and call them local fees. So we're working on a project to bring that back to you to also hopefully stabilize some of the municipal court revenue, because as we get to Fund 27, you'll see that their expenditures are not $134,000. So that's not a break-even proposition at this point. Any questions on the revenues for the general fund?
I'm still a little confused on the fines. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, except that how do you determine that they're going to go down? Oh, because that's what I get it. Never mind.
And this number was projected on the idea that no action would be taken.
Okay.
So
okay.
if the action that is going to be proposed is going to be taken, then obviously it would be something that we would revisit through a revision later in the year.
Okay.
Got one quick question. So,
Sure.
So say DPS writes a speeding ticket and they just pay it, they don't go to court, does that fine go into this fund as well, or?
I believe so. Tony, if they pay it out of court, if you get a speeding ticket, you don't have to go to municipal court, you can just pay it, correct? And that goes still to municipal court, though, it doesn't go to magistrate, right?
Well, we cite it into municipal court, yes.
Yeah.
So that money goes right into your?
Correct.
So if we just start writing more speeding tickets, we can increase that revenue?
And that's what the courts would tell you, and Cooney would tell you they do, and he would also, that's a whole argument.
The White Sands Boulevard about this time, you get bucks.
You got to
And
meet your
so-
quota, Cooney. Got to meet your quota. It's on Facebook. It must be true. You got to
So
meet that
yes,
quota.
getting all of those parties in a room together and having them talk about it is a really interesting experiment in law enforcement versus judicial. Any other questions on general fund revenues? All right.
Nobody? Okay.
Transfers in, the general fund itself does not ever have very many transfers in. It mostly transfers things out. In this case, the transfers in from this fiscal year, FY24, were for Fund 69, which was projects for the police department, and Fund 96, which was from our self-insured fund for a vehicle. If those are not completed by the end of FY24, those transfers roll over, but at this point, we don't have any transfers in planned for FY25. Transfers out, we talked a great deal about this, but this is just kind of another way to look at that chart and graph that we showed earlier. But the general fund transfers out $11.8 million to subsidize all the various funds that are listed here. Okay, so this, I'm going to leave a summary up, and then we're going to go ahead and move through the individual pages in the budget book. So our next page that we're going to talk about is page 8, which is legislative. So as you can see, I'll see your names on there. The legislative portion of the general fund pays the cost of having the city commission. Your budget in reality is pretty straightforward. This year there was an increase in salary and benefits because we had an additional commissioner opting for health insurance. And then the increase in other is a projected increase in travel with having new commissioners and having additional events in Albuquerque. We thought it was important to go ahead and increase the travel for the commission. Any questions on anything on the legislative?
Don't we actually receive 600 per month and 800? We get the
Did I
five-
not change that?
Uh-uh.
I've been looking, I thought I read all of them, and I didn't read that
I
one.
think I asked about that last.
I think you did, and I specifically meant to change it, and
So
I
we get
didn't.
the $50 per regular meeting per the charter and then the
Yes.
500 per the
Yeah.
ordinance.
It's correct in the projection, I just didn't change it in the narrative.
All right.
Any other questions on the legislative budget? All right, we're going to move to page 9, which is our executive city manager department. We tried to cut this one all the way down to 0, but Rick and Stephanie just don't go along. No, you're fine. I thought it was Stephanie, so it was okay. Salaries and benefits, we did do a reallocation in the latter part of FY24, which will carry over to FY25, of reallocating 50% of the assistant city manager salary to the economic development fund, as she has been leading that charge and been doing all of that work. So that was a reallocation there. That's the difference in the salaries and benefits. The other large increase in terms of percentage, not so much in dollar amounts, was to the fees line. This is a planned membership in the New Mexico Municipal League City Managers Association for both the city manager and the assistant city manager, and that isn't something that we've done for many years. So that was a new increase in the fees. Everything else were pretty minimal adjustments. As you can kind of see in the small decreases there, that's pretty much the effect of us asking all of the departments in the general fund to go back and look to cut 10% out of their budgets.
I'd look real close at that bottom line there. You notice that significant reduction.
Is it legal for us to use economic development money to fund half of the position?
It is,
It is.
as long as it's up to 10% of the economic
So we're
development
basically
funds
using the money we used to give to OCDEC
Correct.
to fund.
to fund the
Fund
work
this.
that Stephanie's been doing internally. All right, moving on to page 10. Page 10 is our legal budget. As you can see, there was also a decrease to salaries and benefits here. Partially in FY24, there were several employees in that department that had longevity. who are no longer with that department. So that made a little bit of a decrease when we projected the new salaries and benefits. There's also a decrease in the services due to not budgeting the contract for the contract attorney who's been handling municipal court, with the idea that the assistant city attorney, who is also budgeted in FY24, would be available in FY25 to handle that contract. The changes in fees and the other is an increase in the travel, and the increase in the fees is the increase in the memberships for members of that department.
We hired the assistant city attorney. yet?
We have not hired an assistant city attorney at this point.
I actually have delayed that momentarily while we look at the overall flow of the work in the legal department. So I've kind of held that off for now, but it is budgeted for the next year.
And so that might be one that comes back in a different look through the revision process. Okay. Any other questions on the legal budget? Moving on. Page 11. This is our city clerk's budget. As you can see, most of her changes are minimal. She did have a decrease in advertising under her services, a decrease in postage under her fees, and a small decrease in fleet commercial parts under her maintenance. But in the grand scheme of things, not a bunch of huge changes in a pretty straightforward budget. Any questions there? All right, moving on, page 12, finance and accounting. This is just the best budget. It's done at the very last minute because the finance director is paying attention to everybody else's budgets but her own. As you can see, there's a change in the salaries and benefits. There were 3 positions that were allocated under finance that have since been moved to either different departments or different areas in the budget that still report to finance. So we wanted to get that cleared up and get the right positions in there. So you also see that on the total for the budgeted positions in FY25. The biggest change we had there is in our services. That $2,000 is the expected increase for the audit. There is an automatic riser in that contract every year. And then the decrease in other is a decrease in the travel. We don't have time to go places, so there's no point in budgeting for it. So any questions on the finance budget?
Where's the other 20% of yours coming out of?
81 for utility billing.
Comes out of the water billing? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to page 13. This is the administration non-departmental. There's all sorts of stuff in this one. This is where we pay like all of the utilities for City Hall. It's where we pay a lot of the contract services that are attributed to the city manager. We pay a great deal of our insurance out of here. So as you can see, there's just a lot of different numbers. Some of them are quite large, some of them are a little bit small. The maintenance, we are showing a reduction in our fire systems, not because we're not going to maintain our fire systems, but because we did a large project on those. I'm sure those of you that were in City Hall during that project, saw the work that was being done. So we don't need to budget as much because now we're just maintaining them instead of improving them. In the services, there were large carryovers that were carried over from FY23 to FY24, the biggest of that being the Dudley School expenditures that were budgeted. So a lot of that has been spent in FY24. Maybe there'll be some of that needs to be carried over to FY25. There are also some other contract service projects that were budgeted in FY24 that are kind of one-time projects. So we don't see those needing to carry over into FY25. And then for the fees, the increase in the fees comes from a projected increase in our New Mexico Municipal League dues, and then some of the carryover from paying for some of the increase from FY23 as well. And then at this point, the capital that is showing there, that is the software upgrade program. Obviously, that won't be completed by the end of FY24, so whatever is left there will carry over to FY25.
You said the fees is for the municipal league?
The fees, yeah,
It costs us that much a year to be in the municipal league?
well, no, that's not
Oh, okay.
the entirety of the fees. But the increase, the memberships and dues, we're expecting to go up $7,000. But the other fee that's on here that we expect, that will go up is the gross receipts admin fee comes out of here. And
Is
so,
that what they charge us to collect and review?
correct, that is going away. But it is still budgeted for FY25 because I don't think it goes away until the end of FY25.
End of the year, okay. So it's going up and then it's gonna go away.
Yeah, so it's based right now on a percentage of what we're projecting for the gross receipts tax. Questions on non-departmental?
Anybody have any questions? Nope. We're
Okay.
good.
Page 14, the police bench warrants. So this is the money that is collected as part of the fees on bench warrants. 50% of it is distributed to municipal court, 50% of it is distributed to the police department, and then per ordinance, there are certain expenses that are tied to this. This ordinance is also under review as part of the kind of municipal court redo. We want to make sure to kind of check the language. The language is kind of vague and kind of restrictive all at the same time. So we're looking at it to be able to make sure that it can help the police department actually serve those warrants. Right now, the majority of it is used for overtime for any of the officers who are willing to work extra to serve bench warrants.
I think we're good.
Questions? All right. Page 15. This is for code enforcement. So as you can see, code enforcement, again, has some little changes. Their biggest change is in the contract services. So they had a large carryover that came from FY23 into FY24. So obviously that carryover is not accounted for in FY25. They also had a decrease in their abatement services for FY25. It's a pretty small decrease. So really the biggest change there is coming from the change in the carryover not being there both times. We also, they don't have any capital budgeted for FY25 at this point. And then for FY25, there is a decrease in the other. And that was a decrease in equipment. Partially, we were able to get them quite a bit of their equipment that they needed in FY24. So Code Enforcement Manager Sides was able to decrease his ask for his equipment in FY25. Not 100% voluntarily, but he did do it. The other thing I wanted to highlight here that usually we do bring up is for FY25, they are, again, budgeted $300,000 in structure demo. Questions on code enforcement?
That was the services? Is that what-
That's under services, yeah.
Anybody have any questions? Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, page 16, planning and zoning. Planning and zoning, their biggest change was the services. This is from in FY24, there's money budgeted for the ordinance review that's ongoing for several of the planning and zoning ordinances. And If that is not completed, it would carry over for FY25, but for right now, it's only budgeted in FY24. The other large decrease that they had was in other, and that's a decrease in their travel line and also in their fuels line.
Is that planning and zoning admin assistant, is it just a part-time position? Or?
No, she actually,
that
10% is in engineering because
Okay,
she
it
takes
comes out of
the
both.
front for engineering. Okay. All right, page 17, animal control. So animal control is seeing an increase from the salaries and benefits, mostly due to a change in the staff from when the FY24 budget was rolled. They're getting their step increases, and then also in the FY24 budget, all of the employees in animal control did not need to take insurance, where some of the newer ones do. So that's some of the difference there. The decrease, as you can see, they kind of have some small decreases throughout. The designated materials, which would be under supplies. So the designated materials is tied to their donation line, and this would be something that would carry over. So it's included in FY24. If they don't spend it, then it will be carried over to FY25 as part of their donations. They did have a decrease in fleet commercial parts, partially because this year they had some additional expenditures. I know they had to buy some tires. And then a decrease in contract services, kind of same thing. There were some carryovers there as well.
Any questions? We're good.
All right, page 18, let's talk about PSAP. So formerly this was the dispatch center that was housed in the police department, but in August of 2023, the dispatch center combined with the Otero County Dispatch Center to create the Tularosa Basin Regional Dispatch Authority, or TBRDA. We are responsible for paying a portion of the authority's overall expenses. For those of you who sit on that board, I don't have to tell you anything more about that budget process. For those of you that don't, we did agree to budget $950,000 towards the TBRDA budget for FY25. And so that is why this number is here, and it's just in services because we have it booked as a contract service.
Any questions? That was easy.
Okay. Page 19, the police department. So the first thing that will kind of stick out to you on the police department is under the salaries and benefits, that's a decrease. I know that's kind of counterintuitive, but there's a couple different reasons for that. One, this is the first year that we have been able to budget mostly full positions. Normally, we're budgeting a great deal of vacant positions, and when we budget those vacant positions, we have to budget them at full insurance, full para, full everything. We're assuming that they're going to cost us as much as possible. So in this case, the FY25, we're not budgeting as many vacant positions, so we're not having to budget as much full insurance and everything like that. We also have not adjusted the FY24 budget down to take into account those differences. So the FY24 budget is still showing like we budgeted for a bunch of vacant positions. So that's the major driver there. The other decreases in supplies, that is a decrease in law enforcement supplies. Most of those expenditures have been moved over to the Law Enforcement Protection Fund, which we will see under special revenue. And then we do have an increase, as you can see, our increase in insurance. The police liability insurance took a pretty good jump. We're expecting that it'll probably take another pretty good jump next year as well. Same thing, they don't have any capital budgeted for FY25, but if any of their capital isn't completed, it will roll over.
What all's included in other?
In this case, what is included in other is community relations, books and publications, travel, equipment, computer hardware, computer software, fuels, uniforms, animal expense, and that's it for this group.
Fuel, like as in for all the units?
Fuel, yeah, as in car fuel, yeah.
We'd spend more than that on fuel.
So they are budgeted for $140,000 for FY25. They're at $129,000 for FY24.
Are those some typos for that other
I was
line
just
item-
gonna
line
ask
item?
that same question. I'm like, that's not adding up at all.
Yes, there's a typo in the change.
Okay.
The change was definitely not $3,017.
I'm glad I'm not the only, I was like, sorry, I had to look at that like by picture. Okay. So does that change the overall change? Does that change that number?
Yeah, so the overall change would be closer to $200,000. So like the big decreases that they have in that line, their travel is going down $20,000. Their equipment is going down $113,000, partially because in the equipment they have
So that's going to
some.
change the bottom line though? Yes?
Yes, I don't know. I don't know if the only total that's wrong is just the change. We'd have to look.
I changed it by 200,000.
Make the decrease 1.4.
Yeah,
Say that one more time.
I said that would make the decrease 1.4 as opposed to 1.2.
Okay,
I guess I didn't bring the formula down.
okay, that's okay.
Apologize for that.
That's a good thing.
right, the
not a
decrease.
bad thing.
Yeah, it's not going up, it's definitely going
not
down.
going up, right.
But like I said, the decreases are mostly there in travel and equipment, and there's also some in uniforms and animal expense.
Is it equipment that they may or may not need?
So that equipment line item is for,
See Cooney back there smiling.
so that's for the equipment that's under $5,000. It's the controllable property. So like I know, in fact, the number, it's probably not reflected in this report that I have, but we just transferred $71,000 in there to buy them new tasers.
Okay.
So, you know, a lot of it is replacing that everyday use equipment.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want to short them on it, you know.
Cooney will take whatever you give him, and more,
I think they
and
all
some
need-
that somebody else will
need
give
some
him.
newer AR-15s or whatever that, that newer version that the military's coming out with, so, yeah.
Upgrade,
I'd like to point out,
upgrade.
part of that decrease is the city manager reduced 10%.
Yes.
to the department.
Right.
Yeah, because they were in the general fund, so.
No, that's good. Okay, so that bottom line total should be more like 1.4 million.
Correct.
Yeah.
Difference between the 522 and the 335.
I realize in the grand scheme of things, it's only 200,000. but-
That's all right.
It's a
We
lot of money.
should have caught it in our review.
It will be corrected on the final.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just want to make sure that's, so everybody hears that. Yeah.
I just also too, you know, I know he wants to cut everybody by 10%, but like in certain funds, I kind of disagree with that. So I just want to make sure they're getting what they need out there because we have been putting some pressure on them. And
That's absolutely, they'll get what they need, but we had to start with a number to get that budget down to a point where it was going to pass muster with all these requirements. But I can assure you, they're not hurting for anything that they need.
Cooney's got a smile on his face. He's like, well, now that you mentioned it.
Well, and we'll talk about the Law Enforcement Protection Fund, that the state has significantly increased that in the last couple of years. Back, you know, you'll remember the day back when they would get like 35,000.
It was.
Now their minimum is 95.
okay, so we're funding
Okay.
a lot of that stuff out of that other fund.
Correct.
instead.
Yeah, okay, good.
A lot of their travel and equipment. Okay, so on to page 21, which is going to be our fire department. So for them, they are the first department that we're coming to that received an allocation in new positions. So the fire department received an allocation of 3 additional firefighters for FY25. That's to help with the ISO rating, to hopefully get us up to a higher ISO rating, which will help our insurance rate. It'll help everybody in the community's insurance rate. So we're excited about that. I know it's something that Chief Ramirez has been working really hard at. The other changes in there's, the maintenance has increased because we moved the heating, cooling, and communications maintenance out of the fire protection fund and into the general fund. That was for reporting purposes. They have a new head of the fire protection fund. It moved from being under the Public Regulatory Commission to being under the state fire, or not the state fire marshal, but under the Homeland Security, and that guy is tough. He is really tough. So to make it a little bit easier on the department's reporting, we moved those expenses into the general fund, and then we moved the fuel expenses to the fire protection fund, just to make it a little bit easier on Amanda when it comes audit time. Any questions on the fire department?
Anybody have any questions?
Out of curiosity, what is the ISO rating right now?
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, Directors, Rick Holden, City Manager, City Attorney.
Whoever he is, it's okay.
The ISO is Insurance Services Office, and what that is that's a fire service insurance that all businesses in the city are accounted by. So by having a lower fire ISO number, preferably a 1,
Decreases
you
our
get the best
insurance.
ISO rating, and that goes for all businesses within the city.
So what are we currently rated right now?
Currently, we are rated at an ISO 3, and actually, just as a preliminary, we're jumping to a 2, and then with the push of everything, hopefully a high 1.
So then everybody should see that, because that affects our insurance rates, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And the lower the number, the better.
That's correct.
Because I think I remember when I first started on the commission, it was way up there.
We were about a 4 back then.
Yeah.
See,
I'm sorry.
I doubt rates will go down with an ISO. You know how insurance companies are, so.
Well, one can hope. It's still better, it's still good, though, to have an ISO rating that low. I mean, regardless, it just says we're doing something right, so.
Something, if we are able to go to a high 1, there's only 2 other places. There's only 2 other ISO in the state of New Mexico cities, which is Albuquerque and Las Cruces. So we would actually be number 3 with ISO class.
It's not bad. It's pretty good. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I knew we were like a 1, 2, or 3.
It's good, though. I mean, that's way better than it was.
Fire department doesn't use any supplies either. You said those are coming out of the fire
Yeah,
protection.
like
Fire
almost
protection
all
fund.
of their supplies
All
come out
of
of the
that's
fire.
coming out of it. Okay.
They're getting close to $800,000 a year from fire
Fire
protection.
protection.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Okay, we're good.
Okay. Let's go to page 22, which is our APS resource program. So this is where we track the salaries and benefits for the 2 school resource officers. So that is currently what is in here. And then this is 50% is funded by APS. So there's an offsetting revenue under the revenue. And this is their salaries, benefits, everything rolled together.
So those 2 officers cost us double that?
Those 2 officers cost us, with everything together, $212.
It cost us that, but I mean, it
But,
costs the school system.
but the school pays 106 of that.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
that's total,
Yeah.
the 212. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we pay the expense, they'll pay us 106,000 in revenue.
They give us back. Okay. I thought you meant we pay 212.
No,
they pay
no,
212. I was
gosh.
like, good Lord.
I'm gonna go be a school resource
I know.
officer.
I know, right? Me too. Okay, anybody have any questions?
Okay, so that is the last department in the general fund. So does
Okay.
anybody have any other overarching questions or specific questions for the general fund?
Okay, does anybody need to take a break, or should we keep going?
I see you're all very well hydrated. There's a lot of water up there, so
We do?
good job, guys.
Everybody good? All right, let's keep going.
All right, so next tab is going to be the internal service fund. So as we talked about, these are the departments that serve the inner workings of the city. They have very little service to the outside public, but they do a lot of work inside the city. So we're going to go ahead and first look at page 24. Oh, actually, we'll look at our recap real quick first. So the goal of the internal service fund is to not make money, because the internal service fund, as you can see, has very little revenue. It only has about $200,000 in revenue, and that actually most of that is not revenue from outside. Most of that is revenue from an enterprise, like the component unit of the landfill. And some of it is from the cell phone tower leases that go to facility maintenance. But you'll notice the transfers in are the much larger number, because these departments are funded by transfers from all of the other funds throughout the city. So we're always trying to budget this one as close to zero as we can, because we don't want to be making money off of departments that are already trying to operate. So for FY '25, we're looking at a beginning cash balance of $103, and net cash transfers of 5.1 million, expenditures of 5.4, so an ending cash balance of $105. Trying to be as neutral as possible. So to page 24, again, talking about just a little bit of revenue. The user fees are also things that come from other departments, including the component unit. The miscellaneous revenue that's the cell phone tower leases. And then it's also any other reimbursements, anything where we're charging the public for services that may be facility maintenance provided. It's really, really a small amount that is reimbursed. Any questions on the revenues for Fund 12?
Anybody? Nope, we're good.
Okay, same thing that we've been talking about. Not a lot of transfers out. They don't fund any other departments, but a lot of transfers in. 5.194. All right, so I'm going to leave this one up here, and then we're going to go ahead and transition to page 25. So this is administration purchasing. So this is our purchasing office that's over there in Florida. They handle all of our state procurement, all of our purchasing, and then also the chief procurement officer also oversees the warehouse. So that's why you see the inventory administrator and the central receiving attendant have a small portion that comes out of here, because they do disperse some goods to the other departments. Not a lot of big changes. Salaries and benefits have step increases. Services, there's an increase there because they were approved to have some money to increase the security. We have been having a terrible time with having people break into our surplus property area. They cut the fence, they steal the bikes, they jump the fence, they steal the bikes. So we've been, working on securing that more, increasing our lighting, increasing our cameras, everything like that. So that's the increase in contract services there is for some of that increased security. The decrease that you see in others, so that is a decrease in equipment. They were approved for some equipment this year. That was kind of a one-time purchase. And then also, we do have to write off some inventory that's either damaged or obsolete. It's a pretty small number, but they do have a decrease in the budget from last year. We don't think we have as much damaged or obsolete as we did last year. Any questions on purchasing? moving on to page 26. This is our human resources, another one of our internal services. So they have a decrease in their maintenance because that's a decrease in their office machine maintenance. A decrease in services, that was a decrease in their investigative services. And their decrease in other comes from a decrease in both their travel and their equipment. Same sort of thing. They were they were given a budget this year to purchase some equipment for the training room over at Oregon School. One-time purchase, once a year. It's not something that they're going to need to repeat for next year. Any questions on HR?
No questions? Okay.
Okay, facility maintenance. So facility maintenance, their biggest decrease obviously is in maintenance. There is a reduction in the communications maintenance, but that is from a project that we take the money from the cell phone tower leases and we put that in a project and we allow that to accumulate to give Paul and his staff a base to make some communication improvements. So that project right now is currently in FY24, so the balance of it will roll over to FY25. That will make up most of that difference in that decrease. The decrease out of capital is they were not awarded any capital this year, so if they have any capital that's not complete, of course it will roll over. And then the increase in services is to make sure that they comply with the face mask fit testing that you're supposed to do per OSHA for the face mask you're supposed to wear during confined spaces and in hazardous air situations. All of those need to be tested for fit, so that's something that we made sure got budgeted this year.
That cost us 50 grand to test that?
It's super expensive because we got to buy them, we got to test them, and everything like that.
What's the fine if we get caught not testing it? Is it cheaper?
We get sued.
Huh?
We get sued.
Oh.
I didn't hear that.
What's that?
Anyway, moving on.
Some of them rules.
We always comply.
Yeah, them rules
I know.
are ridiculous sometimes.
Okay. Anybody?
You guys remember the lead paint push back about 10 years ago? And it just kind of died and went away. I mean, it's still there, but not really there, so it's kind of the same thing.
They'll just find something else to replace it. Yeah.
Fiberglass next.
Was it silica? Wasn't that a big one too?
Yeah, silica.
That was big when I was leaving the housing authority.
That was lead-based paint, I think, actually.
Yeah, that was big too.
Anybody else have any questions? Nope. All right.
All right, page 28. This is MIS, or our IT services. So these are the services that we outsource to Better IT Services, but we also purchase a lot of our own hard equipment, computer hardware, computer software, servers, all sorts of wonderful stuff, switches. So as you can see, there's no salaries and benefits, obviously, since it's all outsourced. Services, there is an increase. That's from an increase in our contract services. We've increased some of the inventory control that they do for us. They also house most of our servers and upkeep most of our servers. So the other thing also is we have an increase in the fees for software support. We are always looking for new softwares, trying new softwares. We're always adding and subtracting new softwares. And of course, their prices are also increasing. So that's where we're seeing that. The carryover, or the amount that we have in capital, is two different things. We receive $80,000 every year to continue replacing computers, and we also receive $115,000 every year to continue to pay for our phone system.
Questions?
On the fees section, is that like one-time fees? I mean, that's a pretty substantial increase, or is it?
So we
because we're-
have like 75 softwares.
Mhm.
And we have some that we pay for on an annual basis. We have some we pay for on a triennial basis. A big part of that is our Microsoft licenses. So we have 400 Microsoft licenses. So that itself costs about $300,000. So it's just a mishmash of all 75 softwares.
So that increase of 340,000 could be some of those triennial
It's some of,
renewals
yeah,
that
it's
would
some of those
come
that
up?
are hitting, it's some of, we have some that are priced at an introductory rate that are now getting closer to being at their full rate. And we also continually add users. When I first started in finance in 2018, we had 300 licenses, and we have 400 licenses. And as that is, Tim is always calling me and saying, you know, hey, we're really close on Adobe licenses. Like Adobe is a great example. When I started in finance, we had 17. Now I just renewed it for 120. So it's, as everything just becomes more and more digital, more and more electronic,
Yeah.
we just have to keep adding.
That's why I was thinking you've got to have it.
Yeah.
It's not even an option, yeah. Any more questions? Okay, we're good.
Okay, so page 29 is going to be our fleet maintenance. Salaries and benefits change on the fleet maintenance. We had decreases in health insurance on several of the people, so that was the major decrease there. And we had an increase in contract services, a decrease in the equipment maintenance on maintenance, pretty small one, it wasn't a huge change, and neither was our increase in contract services. Our biggest change was on other, because this was where we added additional training and additional equipment for our fleet maintenance group to be able to keep up with new certifications. Kind of same thing we just talked about. The vehicles keep getting more digital, they keep getting more electronic. The guys are constantly having to go into trainings and learning how to be able to run the diagnostics on the new vehicles. And then they need to be certified to be able to do that, because if they don't get certified, then they're not actually even going to be able to work on the vehicles. So Robert brought us a really good plan to the budget meetings about what certifications and what equipment was needed so that they can stay relevant and they can continue to work on the new vehicles that we're getting.
No questions? We're good?
No? Okay,
Sorry.
so that's our, no, you're good. That's our last one for internal services. So if there's any other questions for internal services, if not, our next session is special revenue.
Okay, I'm just going to ask a question that is more of an overall salaries and benefits. When you're budgeting every year, are you budgeting, you're budgeting with the assumption that everybody's going to need them, or are you budgeting based on like what they're currently, you know what I mean?
So we budget based on who is currently in the position at the time that we do the projection. So
And whether they're currently getting,
correct. So
The
if
benefits.
you're currently in your position and you're you, and then you have just, you know, single employee insurance and, you know, regular parent, everything like that, we budget based on where you're at. Now, if the position is vacant, we budget at
the assumption that
the
they're gonna need
assumption
all
that you're going to come in and you're not going to need single employee insurance, you're going to need employee plus family.
Right.
You know, we budget to the top of that. We do not budget to the top of the wage scale on the salaries portion. So we do assume that you are going to be coming in at the starting rate for that job.
Okay, okay. Very good. Alrighty.
All right, let's talk about special revenue. So special revenue is a hodgepodge of all the different funds that they didn't know where else to put. So there's a whole bunch of funds in here, and some of them make sense and some of them don't, but we're going to go through each of them individually. So the recap, of course, looks way more daunting than any of the recaps that we've seen before. You'll notice the ones that are highlighted in yellow. So those are the funds that receive a subsidy from the general fund. So that's how we note them on our recap is by highlighting them in yellow. So you'll see for the majority of them, they do have a transfer in. This is for FY24. For FY25, you can see that we have pretty much the same ones. We did add a little bit. We are still spending the cash from the lodger's tax, so we are still required to leave those funds as lodger's tax funds because there is still some cash in there from that. But you will notice that both 16 and 20 have a transfer in for FY25, where for FY24, 16 did not have a transfer in. So that's kind of where you see. And then the same thing, you'll see that difference with Fund 15. Fund 15 did not have a transfer in FY24. This is the corrections fund for the jail. This is estimated that this is one that will have an impact due to the change in the state law for the fees collected through municipal court. So for us to get it to balance, we did need to include a transfer in. So again, this will be another one that once we get through that ordinance review and we bring you guys some options, that would be something we would need to revisit in a revision.
Okay.
So for y'all in your books, you're going to go to page 32. So this is a summary of the revenue from the special revenue funds. So as you can see, it's heavy on the taxes. There's several gross receipts tax funds that are in here. The grants comes from Fund 24, which is the, oh no, wait, this isn't Fund 24, I'm sorry. The grants come from a couple different funds in here, including the money that comes from the state for the senior center, the money that comes from the feds from the senior center. But obviously in this one, just like in several of the other ones that we've looked at, taxes are the big driver. User fees, though, they're getting better. They're getting up there a little bit more. Questions on any of these revenues?
How come our cannabis GRT is going to be 0 in 25?
So the cannabis GRT is an interesting situation. It's because it's set up wrong in the software, and I couldn't make it work before this meeting. So we will bring it as part of the revision when we do the final budget. And we'll talk about, I have a chart that has the cannabis GRT in it about how much we've been receiving.
Okay.
So it's not that we're not receiving it, we are receiving it, and it has increased, and like I said, I have a chart for that. It's just kind of a glitch in the software. It got set up as a multi-year fund instead of a single-year fund.
Say with all the pot stores, I figured that number would be.
Yeah, it's not zero.
Yeah.
It's definitely not zero. Transfers in, so a lot of the special revenue funds are, as we saw, more of our subsidized ones. So they have a transfer in requested for FY25 of $11.3 million. They do have a transfer out of $5.8 million. That's mostly in those GRT funds that we talked about, but there are transfers out of some of these funds that go to the internal service fund as well. All right. So now for your books, we're going to go ahead and move to page 34. This is our special revenue corrections. So again, this is where we pay the cost of housing the prisoners at the Otero County Detention Center. This is always an interesting topic at the budget meetings because really, truly, we're trying to project how many people we think are going to go to jail in FY25. So as you can see, FY23, we were at 76,000. FY24, we bumped it up to 140. 140 probably is a little high, that we're probably not going to end up hitting that expense number. But the cost of jailing prisoners is something that Maria spends a lot of time working with the detention center to make sure that the billing is right. So for 25, we're projecting 114,000 in that cost. We think the fines will cover about 42,000 of that, so we're expecting to need 70,000 from the general fund.
Is there a reason why she thinks it may not be getting billed correctly?
She's very diligent with making sure that the right number are getting billed for the right amount of time. Like she's tough on them.
And how much is it to house somebody?
80 per day.
How much?
80 per day?
80 is going up to 95.
80 and it's
$95
going
a
up to
day.
95.
Well, the good news is they'll be out the next morning, so it's $95. What? I'm not wrong. Okay, sorry. Moving on.
And I think that's one of the things that Maria works hard at is how long they were there for.
Have we talked with, and this probably really isn't budget related, but have we talked with Otero County about setting up cleanup crews again to try to recoup some of our money along the bypass?
Not to my knowledge, but
Used to they
that's,
did though. They're not actually chain gangs, but they would go around and patch potholes and clean up trash alongside the road, the non-violent offenders, to try to recoup.
I know when my horse club talked to the prison in Las Cruces about that for the fairgrounds over there, they said that they were too short-staffed because it requires too many guards.
That's what they're gonna tell
Chain
us
them all
here.
together. You can't run as one. You know?
They'll say the same thing here.
Know what?
They'll say the same thing here.
They used to do it, I mean, up to about 10 years ago. They used to do it.
Yeah,
and
they'll
then-
just say they're too short-staffed. Because that's what we were trying to get a Bible study in there. They didn't want us to do that either because they said they were too short-staffed, so
Got
they're
10
not gonna.
guys chained together and one guard, you know, they're not gonna run away.
I think that's what they're gonna say, but. Hey, maybe they'll surprise me, who knows? Anyway, I'm sorry, moving on.
Sure. All right, so page 35, we're moving from prisons to tourism. So this is Fund 16. This is the promotions fund. So this is where all of our tourism activities are budgeted out of. As you can see, this year it is projected to have for FY25, it is projected to have a transfer in. That'll be something that will adjust when we see the actual cash balance because we are still spending lodger's tax cash out of there. The biggest change that they had is in services, which was an increase in advertising and printing service. If you guys haven't had an opportunity to meet Eileen Flint, who is the tourism coordinator, she's doing a great job. She's got a bunch of plans, so I know she's very excited about FY25 because that's going to be her first budget that she got to be really involved in. So really everything that's in this budget at this point is in support of tourism activities.
What's in supplies? It's a pretty big increase too.
So supplies, the biggest increase for that is promotional supplies. She didn't have any money in promotional supplies in FY24, and it's going to $5,000 in FY25. So we had a bunch of backlog, and then also now this will be all the stuff that she can bring with her to Balloon
Like the hand
Fiesta,
out
to,
stuff.
yeah,
Beer
to the
koozies, that kind of
conferences,
stuff. Yeah, the shirts.
pins, yeah. Any more questions on Fund 16? All right, moving on to page 36.
We're all gonna start jamming out here. I thought Rick broke out his guitar or something. I was like, now?
So let's talk about automation. So the core automation fee is one of the fees that will no longer exist after July 1st, 2024 per the statute. So what we did is we've kind of always had a split in between the court expenses that were in Fund 27 and the court expenses that were in Fund 19 because of the court automation fees. So since those are gone, we went ahead and moved all of their expenses to Fund 27 to make things easier. The only thing that is left here in Fund 19 is, excuse me, the grant. They do still receive some money from the state to help pay for a portion of their software. So that's where you see the $13,500 is the grant. We think that'll offset the fees. And there's a little bit of maintenance that we left in there because that's tied to some of their court automation machinery that they have. So that's what we're expecting. That's why Fund 19 looks different. It's basically its funding source is going away.
Anybody have any questions?
No, just a comment. Some of these, I don't know if this is coming out of a spreadsheet or what, but some of these figures are still off from even if you look at the previous one, the lodger's tax promotion, under other, the dollar change figures off. On the court automation, under expenditures, fees is off. So I don't know if that.
We need to check our formulas, yeah.
Just to make sure that they're populating correctly.
Yeah.
I'll go back and check all the formulas.
Okay, so we're going to move on to page 38. So this is going to be our Civic Center Operations Fund. So as you can see, the revenue for this, the bulk of it is in users' fees. Obviously, this is, a rental based, and then some money in investment income. They do have a transfer in from the general fund to go ahead and balance the fund. Their biggest increases are, actually, they didn't really have any increases. Their only increase was in other, and that mostly came in their special events line. They had a small increase of $5,160. But then, and actually that shouldn't be an increase, that should be a decrease. Sorry, looking at my notes too, that should be a decrease. Because they did have a small increase in their special events, but they did have a decrease in their 4th of July special events and some of their equipment and everything like that. So, like I said, they were one of the funds that we asked to go ahead and cut the 10%. So they were pretty diligent in that, and that's where most of their changes come from.
Yeah, it looks like it's just that last.
Yeah, the other one is not picking it up there. All right, moving on to page 40, we're going to talk about the DARE Donations Fund. So DARE Donations, this is the money that comes in specifically for the DARE program, and it's also the money that specifically is only used for the DARE program. So as you can see, we're pretty modest with our revenue projections, and then we're pretty consistent with, there's a little bit of overtime that's budgeted in salaries and benefits, but for the most part, it's all in services to be able to buy stuff, to be able to put on the annual DARE picnic and some of the other DARE events that they put on throughout the year.
Any questions? Okay.
Okay, page 41 is Fund 27. This is the Municipal Court Operations Fund. So this is the one we've talked about a little bit throughout. But as you can see, like I was pointing out, the transfer in for municipal court is $467,000. As we saw back when we were looking at the income for the general fund, the income's about $134,000. So as you can see, there's kind of a discrepancy there. So that's where, we have to cover their expenditures of $473,000. So as you can see, there's a bunch of increases in this, but those increases are due to what we talked about just a little while ago. They had two funds. They had Fund 19 and Fund 27. We moved everything over to Fund 27. So really their increases are just from the movement of those expenditures over into Fund 27.
Is that why their utilities are going up too?
Yes.
Because of the transfer from fund to fund?
Because they had them split. They had their phone service in Fund 19.
How come they didn't have to cut their supplies by 10%?
We did make them come, but it's the combination of moving it from 19 and cutting it. But yeah, we did require them to cut. All right.
No questions? We're good.
Moving on to page 43. This is the special revenue for the police contingency. This is where we deposit any of the confiscated money or any sort of confiscated items, the proceeds from that, and then it's used to fund confidential criminal investigations. So if the officers need buy money for drug busts, or if they need to purchase something for those investigations, they go to Fund 28.
No questions? Good.
Okay. Page 44 is the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund. So this is the fund where part of the proceeds from the sale of lots go into this, and then it's maintained for future maintenance and development of the cemetery. So in this case, we don't have any expenditures out of here, but we are transferring $40,000 out to purchase an above-ground columbarium, I think is how you say it, installation for the cemetery. So it's really nice. The pictures of it were, really nice. So we think it'll be a nice addition for people who are looking to buy burial plots.
What is it?
It's one of the things they build it, and then you can put your cremated ashes in the casement.
Instead of in the ground.
Save a lot of space in the ground by using them. They're kind of stacked.
Okay.
So pretty popular these days. And again, it saves a lot of physical space out there for burial purposes.
Okay, on to page 45. So page 45 is a summary of the Community Services Fund, Fund 32, which, as we know, is a pretty big one. It's got a lot of different stuff in it. So we do have an additional summary page. And so as you can see, the user fees are what lead Fund 32. As we talked about, that's the attendance at the rec center, the attendance at the zoo, library, everybody who's involved in here. So, and then we have the transfers in. As you can see, the biggest transfer in is going to be from Fund 11 for the subsidy for that. Fund 69 has a transfer in here, and we'll hit on that when we get to the library, but that's a portion for the library. And then we'll go through here and discuss everybody's expenditures for the 8 departments that make up Fund 32. So moving on to page 46. So this is the Community Services Administration. So this handles the day-to-day administration functions for the Community Services Director and her executive assistant. So as you can see, the big change here is the services. This is the contract services for the balloon park, for the pool design and the balloon park design. Those were carried over from FY23. Those designs are either ongoing or should be pretty close to being completed by the end of FY24. If not, whatever's left will carry over. So that services number will not be anywhere near as large. The biggest change in other, as you can see there, so that was a decrease in travel and that was a decrease in equipment, kind of similar, asking to make the cuts, and then also the equipment is kind of a one-time purchase thing for FY24. All right, moving on to page 47. It's another administration, but this is for the Parks and Rec Administration. So this serves the day-to-day operations for the Parks and Rec Director and her executive assistant. So as you can see, there's some adjustments to salaries and benefits based on what we projected in FY24. We had some vacancies right kind of at the start, trying to figure out where everybody fit, but both of those are filled now. So her biggest change is you have the increase in fees. That is mostly an increase in memberships and dues, which we're figuring out what memberships and dues are best for this department. And then the change that we had in other is a change in equipment, same sort of thing. This department is relatively new, so we're still trying to figure out what they needed since they were established in FY23.
No questions?
All right, moving on to page 48. That is our cemetery. So this funds the operations of the cemetery. So as you can see, not a ton of really large changes. Pointing out here, there's the capital expense that we talked about that is coming over from the perpetual fund for the above ground columbarium. Really, the only other change here was utilities, and that is kind of a change in the phone service. We've been doing a survey of trying to figure out a bunch of these different phone lines that we have. We're still in the process of doing that survey and trying to determine which ones are necessary and which ones aren't. So that will be another adjustment that we'll bring to you when it comes for revision, because we're canceling a bunch as we see what's necessary and what's not.
So is that why there's basically no money in the account? Showing no transfers in, no transfers out?
So we don't tie the transfers directly to the departments. We just tie it to the fund.
To the fund? Okay.
Yes. So there is a transfer into Fund 32, which is tied to the capital project of 40, but I don't try and balance it in the individual departments.
What about the salaries and benefits that are coming out of that fund?
What do you mean?
Well, like our page here just shows that we've got $43,911 budgeted, but it's showing we also have $203,000 in.
So that's a portion of the subsidy transfer. That 5.3 million goes towards the cemetery.
To this.
But we don't try and
Break it out.
break
into
it
each
out by
individual
department.
fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
No questions? Like that?
Okay, so page 50 is labeled as leisure services, but this, for the majority of it, is the Family Recreation Center. So as you can see, the Family Rec Center is expecting an increase in their user fees. And they're very diligent about going in and projecting their revenues and reprojecting their revenues. So they do a really, really good job of that. They are the next department that I do need to point out an increase in positions. So they were approved for an additional part-time employee in the rec side and 2 additional seasonal positions for the lifeguards. So that is the increase in the salaries and benefits along with the regular step increases that are in there. Obviously, they have some capital outlay money that is in there for FY24. Initially, we thought that was going to be for repairing the wall at the pool, but the wall is in pretty good shape, so we've transitioned that money to working on resurfacing the pool so that it can get open for swimming this year. So any of that money that is not completed will get carried over. Their changes in other, obviously, we see that there's a math error there. But their main changes, so they have a sponsorship line that is another one of those projects that carries over. Currently, it has $10,872 in it. If that is not used in FY24, it will carry over to FY25.
You said that capital outlays to resurface the pool at 584?
So originally, 500,000 of it was to repair the west wall. And like I said, once we got in there with everybody, it was like, this is not in bad shape. So we transferred it over to repair the, resurface the pool as much as we can without doing, a huge project. It's not going to take up the whole 500,000. So a lot of that money isn't going to carry over because initially we thought the repair on the wall was going to be more substantial.
The exterior wall?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about?
Yeah. Initially, like I said, that was a proposal that came in front of us last budget. Right now, I want to say Paul has a purchase order in there for about $45,000 is really all that he has encumbered against it right now. The other $84,000 that's there is other capital equipment and another capital project that was approved there for cameras.
So you can build a lot of wall for $500,000.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we thought we were going to have to. So, like I said, a lot of that money's not going to carry over. All right, moving on to page 52. So this is our Parks Department. So as you can see, the biggest changes is in our salaries and benefits. That was from having some long-term employees who are no longer with the department. So a lot of those positions are still vacant and are budgeted at the entry level, which is not where they were budgeted at in FY24. From there, for maintenance, they had a decrease in parks equipment maintenance. That's their decrease in maintenance. Their other big decrease in other, that comes from a decrease in fuels and a decrease in tools. But they did still acquire some contingency money that we've been keeping in there to help them deal with the unexpected changes that they have. And then also they did get an increase in uniforms. So that's part of that other number.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, good.
All right, we're going to go on to page 54. Page 54 takes us to the zoo. As you can see, the zoo has decided to project their revenues kind of flat. We expect that we'll be revising that number. They've been pretty successful this year, and then they had a small rate increase as well. So as we kind of see that small rate increase take hold, we'll be able to help them reproject their revenues. Their salaries did increase. They had quite a bit of staff changeover that really changed the insurance that they were taking. So we are looking for that increase there. Their increase in supplies comes from the increase. Their increase comes from the increase in animal feed. Animal feed has increased substantially. I don't think there's anybody on the commission that buys hay, but if there is, you totally understand what I'm talking about. And the zoo buys quite a bit of hay. And then same thing, the increase in their maintenance just comes from an increase in their fleet commercial parts as their fleet gets older, they've had quite a bit of replacement that they've had to do on some of their smaller stuff as well. Their decrease in services, that mostly comes from their decrease in professional services. They had some carryover stuff from FY24 that they won't need to carry over to FY25.
Any questions?
One quick one. All that work that's going on down there right now, is it not come out of this fund?
No, it comes out of Fund 24 because it's all state legislature funded.
That's all capital outlay? Okay.
Okay, moving on to page 56. Page 56 is our Community Affairs Department. This is where the salaries and benefits are for our Community Affairs Manager, our marketing specialists, and our tourism specialists. So this is a relatively new department for us. As you can see, it didn't have a budget in FY23. It just started in FY24. So there's some adjustment, kind of trying to figure out what they need, what they don't need. Their changes in services come mostly from a decrease in printing and a decrease in contract services. The decrease in printing is we've been really looking at where everything is allocated and kind of moving some stuff around. And I think you guys have seen that we're no longer printing the city profile. That went up incredibly. It increased like 200% over 30 days. And we kept trying to decrease the size, and it still kept increasing. So that's one of those publications that we moved to digital. And so that has saved some money here in the community affairs budget.
Any questions?
Okay, so moving on to page 58, we do need to point out a couple things with the library budget. We managed to short the library position in their salary and benefits calculation. So when we bring the budget back for the final budget, we'll highlight that. There will be a difference in that salaries and benefits projection because they were also approved to have a new position. Their new position, though, does have an offset. So they were approved to add a library maintenance position. This was something that they had prior to COVID. It was one of the positions that was let go during COVID, and then it was not, was never added back in. They have been using the janitorial services that is provided through our city contract. And so this year they did request a maintenance position. It is almost completely offset by the savings that they will get by not using the city janitorial. The city janitorial costs them about $46,000 a year. So the salary and benefit number on this is off because we did add a new position and we actually shorted the position. So like I said, we will highlight that when we bring it back for the final budget. So the decrease in their supplies is also kind of a timing thing. So they receive a general obligation bond every year from the state. The general obligation bond runs for 2 years. So they just received their FY24 general obligation. So that number will actually come to you guys as part of the revision that comes on the May 14th meeting. So that will add the money for both years, because we are required to budget for FY24 for both of the years. And so we will carry over the money for FY25. So we'll carry over the revenue and we'll carry over the expense of that general obligation bond. So while it looks like they had a big decrease in their supplies, it's really just a carryover and an addition of that GO bond. The other thing that's not in the supplies that will be added once we have the signed award is the money from the county. So we don't include the money that the county gives the library until we actually have the signed agreement that says how much they're going to be giving us. So that will also be included. If we have it in July, it'll be included in the final budget. If we don't have it until a little bit after that, then we'll include it as part of a revision.
What have they been giving us here lately?
They gave us 50,000 last year.
Remember, it was only like 15 there for a
It
long
was,
time.
yeah, it was like 15, then it was like 25, then it was 50, and it stayed 50.
Squeeze 60 out of them this year. Huh?
That'd be great. They can give us all they want.
What about the capital outlay for them? You may have said it. Now.
So the capital outlay for them is a installation and upgrade of their fire system. So their fire system right now is in desperate need. So that is something, when we talked about earlier, that transfer in from Fund 69, one of the approved items on that ordinance is improvements to library buildings. So we're using the transfer in from Fund 69 to fund the improvement for the library.
Any more questions?
All right, so moving to page 60, this is the Fire Protection Fund. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. This is the money that comes directly to us from the State Fire Marshal's Office, which is now located under a different jurisdiction than it was before. So as you can see, we're projecting that they're going to get about $910,000 in revenue next year. $895,000 of that comes from the fire fund grant, and then the additional $15,000 comes from interest from the investments. So as you can see in their expenditures, with the fire protection fund, the same as the law enforcement protection fund, we're required to have the revenue match the expenses for the grant. So you can see we match the expenditures to the $895,465 number, which gives them a little bit of wiggle room to use the interest income for additional expenditures they find during the year. As you can see, there's no salaries and benefits for FY25. That's because that was a one-time grant funding that they received for the volunteer firefighter program. It's not something that we expect to continue. And then, of course, the capital, that large 1.3 number, the majority of that is taken up with the new fire apparatus that was purchased, that is in the process of being built. Obviously, that's not going to be done by the end of FY24, so that money will carry over, along with any of the operating expenditures that the fire fund deems to allow us to carry over. So we do have to go back to them and apply every year and say, this is the money that we did not spend from FY24. Will you allow us to carry this over for FY25?
What's a breakdown of the maintenance? lot
The
of money.
breakdown of the maintenance. So fleet commercial parts is 165,000. Pest control is 3,500, and equipment maintenance is 35,000. And that equipment maintenance is on the actual firefighters' gear maintenance.
Here. That doesn't add up to 204 though.
No, 165,632 plus 3,500, so that's 168,000 plus 35,000. That's,
What fiscal year are you on? Are you
I'm on fiscal year 25.
Okay, because it's showing on our deal 204, 132.
Right. So if you add 165,632 plus 3,500, that gives you 168,000, or actually 169,132. So 169,000 plus 35,000 is 204,000.
That's a lot of money to maintain all that equipment.
That's a lot of equipment,
Yeah.
and it all has to fit perfectly. And as something you'll probably hear coming forward in the next year and 8 months, our fire fleet is aging. And so they're doing a ton, and Chief Ramirez has been very proactive in really ramping up the preventative maintenance program versus just trying to buy new. He's really working on maintaining what we have. And so I think that he's come up with a really good program. It's going to cost, but I think it's in the long run going to add years to our fleet. Okay, page 61, this is Fund 35, which is the high-intensity drug trafficking area program. So this is the HIDA grant. We actually do not budget the HIDA grant until we receive the award from HIDA, because we have tried multiple times to project it, and it has been a disaster. So once we get the award, we put it in there. Since this book was printed, we have actually gotten that. So for FY24, the award is $12,400. So it'll probably be close to that in FY25. But like I said, once we have the signed agreement, I just last week received the federal questionnaire that I have to fill out as part of that to keep us eligible. So we'll still continue to apply for this one.
Any questions? We're good.
Okay, Fund 62, this is the Law Enforcement Protection Fund. This was the fund that we were discussing earlier that has increased substantially over the years. For FY25, we are projecting to get $159,500. This is the base of the $95,000, and then the additional amount we get per certified officer. So at this point, it is all budgeted in the other, and the breakdown of the other is service and training. In-service training is $45,000, equipment is $35,000, and law enforcement equipment is $79,500. So in-service training and equipment is basically what we've been using the Law Enforcement Protection Fund for. And if you'll remember all the way back to when we were talking about the general fund, those were two of the lines that we had decreased in the general fund. And if any of this money in FY24 is not spent, then we will be allowed to request to DFA to carry it over. That's a form that we fill out and submit with the final budget.
No questions? Okay.
Okay, page 63, which is Fund 37. This is the State Highway Fund. So right now, this fund does not receive any money from the state. The money that comes in to this fund is from the fees, and these are the franchise fees paid by Southwest Disposal. So that is where the funding for this fund comes from. Also, to kind of highlight the grant, so this is where we have been accounting for the Keep Alamogordo Beautiful grant. We have decided in FY25 to not apply for the Keep Alamogordo Beautiful grant, so that's one of the reasons that you don't see it budgeted here. And that's one of the reasons that you see some of the decreases, like the salaries and benefits. That was for a part-time position that was funded by the grant. And then the additional supplies, services. The rest of the expenditures that are coming out of here are to continue the beautification efforts within the city of Alamogordo, just outside of the grant.
Is the grant hard to get, or what? Or is it just more paperwork than it's worth?
It's more paperwork than we get. We get $25,000, and yet we have a full-time employee who spends 3/4 of his time on it, including, and then a part-time intern. And so it's very cumbersome. We also, in the last several years, have not been able to expend all of the funds from the grant. So administratively, it's a lot of work for a little bit of reward when we still have local monies that can be used. And this program, this particular program has a pretty healthy, or this particular fund has a pretty healthy fund balance too. So if there was something that came along that fit within the beautification and litter eradication, it could be funded from here. Okay.
What's the fund balance in that account? Or you mean out of the whole account?
So it currently has, it started FY '24 with $115,000. It's slated to end the year with $109,000. It'll probably end the year with probably close to the $115,000.
115, okay.
So not incredible amount of money, but healthy enough for something. Okay, page 64 is the traffic safety fund. So this is the fee that is collected from any of the traffic violations at municipal court. So this is another one of the fees that's going to be removed per the new state statute. And the task force that is working on that ordinance will be reintroducing a new local fee that has a better defined set of use parameters. Because right now, the ordinance has like one sentence, and it's literally that sentence that's in the summary up here about these monies are used for public outreach programs and education activities, as well as law enforcement needs to promote traffic safety in our area. We feel like we can define that a little bit better and set up the use of those funds a little bit better. So right now we projected it to, what we think. It'll be another one that once we get the new fine set in place, we can reproject through revision if we think it's going to be a little bit different. Page 65 is the 1984 gross receipts tax, which is Fund 42. We've already discussed this one a little bit, but this is the gross receipts tax that is used to repair and maintain the streets, along with weed control, weed abatement, and drainage control. So the main purpose of this fund is to fund 44, which is the transportation, the street maintenance fund. We are planning a $3.2 million transfer out for FY '25. And as you can see, there's also a little bit of debt service that is paid out of here that goes to Fund 59 to pay that debt service. And other than that, there is a small amount in services, which actually that's mostly, if not all of it, is the admin fee for the gross receipts tax. So really, truly, this is a gross receipts tax money in fund and a transfer out fund. So page 66 is a summary of Fund 44, which is our transportation fund. Again, there's a small amount of taxes that come into Fund 44, directly come into Fund 44. It also receives the gas tax reserve that comes from the state, and it also receives a little bit of money from the vehicle registration fees that are collected by the state. But as you can see, that only accounts for $1.2 million of revenue, and so the additional money to balance this fund comes from the transfer in from Fund 42. It does transfer money out to the Internal Service Fund, and then you can see down there, there's the breakdown of the 3 departments that make up Fund 44, and we'll move forward into talking about those individual budgets, starting on page 67. So Fund 67, or page 67, is for Fund 44, Department 2400. This is the Public Works Administrative. So this funds the Public Works Executive Assistant, half of the Public Works Director salary. The other 25% is in Fund 12 for facility maintenance, and 25% is in Fund 12 for fleet maintenance. And then it also funds the Public Works Inspector. So salaries and benefits, right now, actually at the time we ran this projection, both the Public Works Admin Executive Assistant and the Public Works Director were vacant. So that's going to be a little bit different than the FY '24 budget when those positions were full. The changes in services, this biggest part that's in that services is the contract for Zia Transportation. They did request an increase this year, so we did increase that, but then we also, then on the flip side, decreased some of the contract services that was in here. There's some projects that will be completed that won't need to be carried over, some of the planning services that were planned there. Okay, so moving on, page 68. This is the Street Maintenance Division, 5203. So the biggest changes here was the change in salaries and benefits. There are step increases, but there's a change of benefits. This one is hard because there's vacant positions. And so we're constantly trying to deal with the vacant positions and get those budgeted correctly. So I'm sure, as you can see, there is the big decrease in supplies, but if you'll notice a little bit further down, there's a big increase in services. So we moved quite a bit of money out of the supplies, the pavement, the marking and sign supplies, and move that into the contract services. The idea behind that was we don't have the staff and they don't have the time to be just buying these supplies but not then actually doing it. And so a lot more of the work in FY25 is going to have to be under contract services. So the decrease for markings and signs was a decrease of $328,232. The increase in contract services was an increase of $439,133. So money was not taken away from them. Money was transferred to the services category and additional funds were given to them. With the capital is the same thing as the other capital. Most of this is equipment capital, and that will carry over. If the equipment hasn't been received, I think some of it has, but some of it hasn't.
We're gonna contract out striping, basically.
They've moved on contracting out quite a bit of the striping and then getting some more designed and getting some more ready to contract out. And so that was the idea of having this in contract services so that it would already be there. They don't have to come back and ask to move stuff around.
Are they doing it as a bid, or are they doing it as CES?
That I can't answer. That would have to be a Dave question.
That'd be a competitive bid.
That'd be through a bid process? Okay. I just haven't seen any of those bids really come across for us to approve.
There are a bunch of them that are coming out that are advertising here shortly.
You know, used to, back in the old days, it seemed like we approved contracts once a meeting, but.
Well, and there's been a major overhaul of the engineering department, and so you're going to see a lot more competitive bids
Start seeing some
because,
bids.
you know, yes, we were going through CES a lot, and we're trying very hard to move away from that and get back into the competitive bid world.
Back into us kind of deciding what we spend and what we don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Okay. Page 69, this is Department 5303. It is the weeds and drainage. So as you can see, same sort of thing. Maintenance decreased 122,000, but services increased 136,000. Same thought process. You know, we only have so much staff. They only have so much time. So we need to, instead of buying supplies or budgeting money in supplies that they can't use, we need to budget that money in services and get some contracts out there on the street. They had a large amount of capital allocated to them in FY24. The majority of that was in equipment, and then there's also a drainage improvement project. That drainage improvement project is to clean out the drainage basins. That one is bid or is about to be? Yeah. So that one you'll see here relatively shortly.
Second.
There's $500,000 in that.
Is that gonna be the one back over there where Oasis Trailer Court was, or?
That'd be that one and the one behind the public works yard.
Okay, the ones up there, to get both those detention basins or those cleaned up? Okay.
So we believe that that will definitely be a carryover. It's not going to be completed by the end of the year. The equipment, most of the equipment is here, so I doubt that that will carry over. Okay, on to page 70, engineering. So as you can see on page 70, for the last couple years, we have broken out the transfer in for engineering out to a bunch of different departments based on the allocation of the projects. This last year was an interesting year for engineering because most of the positions were vacant for most of the year. It was definitely a transition year as former long-term employees were leaving and we were looking for new ones. So Maurice and I talked about it and we went back and forth and we kind of looked at some things. And so what we decided to do for FY25 for the initial preliminary budget was take that all out of Fund 61. Fund 61 is a gross receipts tax fund that is eligible to cover the expenses of the engineering department. It also gives us a chance to relook at our allocations and look at how we're allocating those projects. So at any point during the year, we can bring that back if we want to change that allocation. But for right now, we felt like that was the most simple, fair way with the information that we had at the time.
Have we thought about, this is just a question, but like, in the past, we always had an engineer on staff. Have we thought about doing that again, or are we just gonna contract it out for the engineering services?
So it's been a major topic of discussion in between Director Nunley and City Manager Holden, myself. That is the direction I know Director Nunley wants to go. City Manager Holden, poor guy, we've thrown a lot at him in these couple months, but I think it's definitely something that he's also looking at. At this point, we needed to get project managers because we had projects that were not managed. So that's kind of the first building blocks. I see in the future that that will definitely be something we want to build to.
When's the last time we had a city engineer?
Dean?
Was it Watson?
Oh,
Jason.
well, Jason was an engineer,
He was here for a short period of time after Bill, right?
but I don't think he had a stamp. Yeah, the last long-term one was Dean Hunt.
And that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to page 71 to the actual expenditures of the engineering department. So again, when we did the salaries and benefits for this department, all of their positions were vacant. The FY24 salaries and benefits include a long-term employee who was making quite a bit of money, so that's why you see the difference there. The decrease in services mostly comes from a decrease in I see. Mostly comes from a decrease in contract services, but we increase consultants. So it's kind of one of those, we're just changing the name. It's still all under services. We do have on-call engineers. I believe we have 10 on-call engineers that are under a master service agreement. So if any of the departments need, including the engineering department, need to use them, they don't have to go back out to competitive bid. They can issue a task order off of the master service agreement that was already competitively bid.
No question?
Okay, so Fund 69, which is probably my favorite gross receipts tax fund on page 72. As you can see in the summary there, its dedicated purpose, it may include a storage reservoir, public safety buildings, fire substations, flood control projects, and library building improvements. So I think they just took a bunch of things out of a hat and put them all together in the gross receipts tax. So that being said, We are using this gross receipts tax to fund the improvement of the fire system at the library, and also for some principal and interest that is on flood control loans, which are the ones in Fund 59. So same sort of thing. This is a gross receipts tax in, transfer out fund. Okay, so on to page 73. Page 73 is for Fund 71. This is the Senior Center Fund. This is obviously what is used for the daily operations of our senior center. They run the programs out of here. They run congregate meals, home delivered meals, fitness, transportation, and also local programs. So they receive state money, federal money, and then as you can see, they receive a transfer in from the general fund, and that is their local money. So as you can see, it's showing a decrease in the supplies. Part of that is the ARPA money that is still sitting in there for FY24. That ARPA money will not be eligible to be carried over to FY25. It sunsets on 6/30/2024, so I know they're diligently working on spending that. The other thing that this does not include is it does not include the allocation from the county, because same thing like we talked about with the library, until we have that award letter in our hand, we're not budgeting that. So as you can see, not too many other changes. There is an increase in other expenditures, and the majority of that is we did give them a $50,000 contingency this year because the senior center has a lot of moving pieces and they break. The oven breaks and the stove breaks and the van breaks and
Didn't the AC go out or
the AC goes out, and they do a great job of going to the state and getting emergency funding for that. But sometimes the state doesn't have any emergency funding, and sometimes, so by giving them the contingency, we let them have a little bit of leeway.
What's the county's typical donation, I guess you could say, or their contribution to this?
Let me switch pages. I do not have it on this one. Magdalena?
27,000 for transportation and 18 for home delivered.
That's all they contribute to us? For that?
And they are really good. Magdalena does go back to them quite a bit and, hey, is this okay? Is this expenditure here? We've got this. Like, they're very flexible with their funds. So they've been really good to work with.
How much was the transportation? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You
Was
said
it
27 and 18, so 45.
45?
And you guys you do home delivered out to La Luz, right? Yeah. See, I knew Magdalena would know. She's on it. Okay, any other questions on the senior center? All right, moving on to page 75. This is the senior center gift fund. So this is the money, donations, bequeathments in wills, a couple different things, pretty much anything that the senior center gets that we're really not sure what to do with, we put in the senior center gift fund. So as you can see, we do budget a little bit of revenue with their expenditures. Most of that money is in projects because it's given for a particular reason. For example, they have a project that it's the bingo donations. And so that money is supposed to be used to buy new bingo stuff. So we save up the bingo donations, and when they have enough money in the bingo project, then they buy, new bingo stuff. So there's a bingo project, there's a fitness project, There's the Patricia Martin project for somebody who had left some funds. So all of those projects, if they're not spent out by the end of the year, they carry over. And then also, I know Magdalena has been working on, this fund has some cash balance in it. It has about $100,000 of cash balance. So she's been working at looking at some avenues to be able to spend that to do some upgrades for the seniors. All right, page 76. This fund is still called the Senior Volunteer Program. That I know harkens a lot of people to the RSVP program, which we no longer have. So currently this fund operates 2 volunteer programs, the Foster Grandparent Program and the Senior Companion Program. Both of these are primarily funded with a grant through the state. There is one employee who is paid for out of this program. She does a really good job. And so she is the one that's in those salaries and benefits. Everything else that's in here are supplies or services or stipends that go to the seniors who do this volunteer service. So they get stipends for meals and transportation and things like that when they're out doing their volunteer services. So, like I said, for the most part, this is grant funded. We do have a transfer in of $34,000. It most likely won't be that much once we know exactly what we're getting from the state, because usually they cover a good portion of it.
Okay.
All right. Page 78. This is another one of our gross receipts tax funds. This is the Fund 89, so acquisition, construction, operation of solid waste and water facility sewer systems and related projects. It's also known, as the environmental gross receipts tax. So as you can see, same kind of thing. It's a gross receipts tax in, transfer out to Fund 81. We also do some transfers out of this one sometimes to fund things for the convenience center or sometimes wastewater projects. But for FY25, the transfer out for the $400,000 is for some capital in Fund 81. Page 79, this is our self-insured fund, Fund 96. So this is where we pay for any of the self-paid and comprehensive claims on the city-owned trucks and automotive equipment. We have had quite a few claims ourselves this year. We've had quite a few wrecked vehicles. So you'll notice our self-paid claims, which is under the insurance line, this year we have a budget at $206,000. We had some big ones. We had a $64,000 fire truck. I'm going to look at both of the chiefs. Stop wrecking police cars and fire trucks. But Fleet does a good job of getting these repaired. So as you can see, so the user fees, those come directly from the fleet insurance allocations that we charge to the departments. And then at this point, we have projected $100,000 for next year. Let's try and keep it under $100,000. We also, if we receive any money back from the insurance companies, which is what's under miscellaneous revenue, we deposit that here and then we transfer that back to the departments.
So you're saying it was our fault, is that what you're saying? Okay. Well, I mean, honesty is always the best policy.
It's not always 100% our fault, but it happens.
It helps, it's right there with half of Alamogordo, so.
Page 80 is our liabilities and deductibles. So this is another one of our self-paid claims. So this is where we pay our self-paid torts. It's where we pay our fees to New Mexico Self-Insurers Fund. If we have settlements, usually they're paid out of here as well. So we have budgeted $535,000 for next year. Right now, this fund started FY24 with a fund balance of 1.08 million. It's, projected to end the year with 554,000. I obviously don't think we're going to spend all 535,000 this year. So we'll probably start the beginning of next year pretty close to $1 million. And, this fund depends on how our lawsuits go. Page 81 is the cannabis GRT, as we talked about earlier. I got to figure out how to fix that in the computer system so that we can actually enter it in the computer system. So as you can see, we're budgeted at $204,000 for revenue this year. We're going to exceed that. We'll see that on the slide coming up in a while. And right now, it is all budgeted in salaries and benefits to provide sign-on bonuses for the police department. And when I get it figured out how to enter it into the computer system, we'll have that discussion with City Manager Holden, and when we bring the final budget to you, we'll tell you how we have it budgeted for FY25. And that is it for special revenue. As special and fun as it is.
Does anybody need a break?
We all
5
need a break.
minutes? 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5. I wonder if 5's enough time to go to Starbucks, no?
It's enough time to write it down and send somebody to Starbucks.
I need to.
That's still, but where they're gonna get you,
Oh, he got out.
you have a CDL.
I don't. But I thought when you own it as your personal stuff, you don't have to have it. Because like those big Greyhound motorhome buses, you don't have to have a CDL to drive.
He's going for a ride, huh?
It's a gray area, man.
Like if you have one of your employees drive it, they have to have a CDL.
I'll get
But
something
if
to
you're
eat when I get
the
out
owner,
of here.
Evelyn.
Can I get out of here?
That's a
Evelyn.
big gray area. And
I've been thinking about going getting the CDL anyway. You know, that way it'd be
How
legal.
fast can you do this?
We're on the downward. That last part was the worst. It's the worst every year.
Like we get to bed, there's nothing to do about that.
Oh, my God.
All right, so let's talk about capital. So we have 8 funds that comprise our capital section. So, uh-oh, did I break it? Oh, no. That's not listening to me anymore, Rachel.
Well, we must be done then.
Rachel left.
Rachel made it.
Fine.
It's like, call me when it's done. Tim can handle
She
it.
went to get batteries.
It turned on. There we go.
Timed
All
out.
right. Plus another 5, so we have 13 total. So here is our FY24 recap. So as you can see, different from the special revenue, the capital funds, none of them are subsidized. Most of them receive funding, or most of them are the ones that provide funding to other funds, or they're funded through grants or their own gross receipts tax. So, and then for FY25, we have some balances. I did want to point out, obviously, some of the bigger funds that are in here, the Municipal Infrastructure Fund 61, that one is slated to start with 2.2 million. The Economic Development Fund is slated to start with 6.8, and 109, which has our street capital improvement gross receipts tax, is slated to start at 12.7. So revenues, so we're on page 83 in your book. So obviously the biggest driver in these funds is the taxes. $8.6 million worth of gross receipts tax is projected. The grants, the 2.4 is mostly in Fund 24, which is the state capital outlay. So that's where all of the state projects are budgeted. So those are the big drivers. And then, of course, because there's some big balances in these funds do accrue quite a bit of investment income. So we're expecting about $800,000 in investment income. So overall for these 13 funds, we're looking at revenue of $11.8 million. Again, they're not the type of funds that get a lot of transfers in. The transfers in that are budgeted in FY24, most of those come from leveraging. So the leveraging match for the CDBG grant. If some of those other ones that are in 24 have matching requirements. So actually that whole transfer in amount there is made up really of 2 projects. The leveraging transfer in for the CDBG grant and the leveraging transfer in for the Great Blocks. Because the Great Blocks is $1.5 million that the city is contributing to the $1.9 million that they're receiving through Great Blocks.
When is that starting?
They are in the process of putting out the water and sewer bid.
We're in the middle of doing that right now, then, for the water and sewer portion from New York, or on New York from 8th Street to 10th Street. And then, once we notice that we're getting so far into that, that's when we'll put out the Great Blocks part.
So that's the,
Pave everything and then rip
So that's the 1.5 million first, followed by the 1.9 million. So obviously, these funds, the transfers out are a much bigger deal because especially from those gross receipts, they transfer out to not only fund projects and other funds, but are transferred out to pay debt service. Okay, so going to page 84, this is our capital projects, grant capital improvement fund. So right now in FY24, there's a bunch of projects. Several of those projects are going to carry over because they will not be completed by the end of the fiscal year. So you'll notice like salaries, benefits, supplies, utility services. Most of those are from the Paso del Norte CIT grants that are located in this fund that are finishing up, and the Carol Petrie grants that are received from the Carol Petrie Foundation for Animal Control. And then the other grants that are in here is like the DWI, the state DWI program grants are also in here. So little bits in there, but as you can see, the biggest part is the capital. The capital for FY25, so this is the state funding that was received from the legislative session that was at the beginning of 2024. So as you can see, we received 2.4 million, and it's broken down there from the money for the zoo for their projects, the Dudley School Playground, the money for the golf course, vehicles for the police department, and the library patio construction. So those are all of the ones that we have. We should start receiving those contracts September and October timeframe. You get those of course will come in front of you guys for approval. You approve that, and then we'll move forward with starting to get those projects going. Any questions on Fund 24? Okay. Page 85, the CDBG Community Development Block Grant Program. As I'm sure everyone here is aware, we currently have a CDBG project. It is almost done. It's in the final wrap-up stages. In fact, Debbie emailed us just recently that they'll be having the CDBG closeout public hearing here shortly. And so we can get that closed out, get all of the closeout documents done with DFA. And then at that point, there's a little bit of time before the next application if the commission decides that they want to apply for another CDBG grant. Debbie does a great job with this. We get very good responses back on our monitoring report, which is a big deal with CDBGs, so she does an excellent job. Page 86, this is our gross receipts tax from Fund 49 that was approved in 1986. The majority of this is to repair, upgrade, rehabilitate, replace, and install water facilities outside of the city limits, including property rights and water rights. This is the fund currently that we would use for purchasing the Mountain Trout Farm that they're currently in negotiations for. That's expressly what this fund is for. The other purpose that this fund can be used for is you can rededicate up to 50% of the fund revenue to the general fund to cover operating expenditures. So that's a transfer that has been used in the past. We don't currently have that right now. This fund also transferred quite a bit of money to Bonito. That's no longer necessary. So right now, it does have a little bit of capital that was approved for FY25. And I think that is a design for something. No, that's the pipeline replacement money. So we are required every year to budget $200,000 in pipeline replacement, and this is where it lives, is in Fund 49. Okay, Page 87, this is Fund 54. This fund is pretty close to being able to be closed out. This was where the RO plant project was taken out of. As you can see, there's a little bit of money that has been carried forward, the $10,447. We'll have a discussion if that money needs to be carried forward into FY25. If not, we won't carry it forward and we'll close Fund 54 for FY25 since the RO plant is built. Okay. Fund 88. So Fund 88 is the 1999 flood control project. So this was the Army Corps of Engineers project. We left $269,000 in here for FY25 because there was an additional payment that needed to be made to the Corps of Engineers. We did make a payment to them earlier this year, so we just need to find out from them if there's anything else that we need to be able to close out that project. If they say it's good and it's closed, then we would not carry any money over here and we would close out this fund as well. Page 89, this is the 1991 gross receipts tax infrastructure. So this is Fund 61. Again, it is currently a water infrastructure, including but not limited to sewer lines, storm sewers, other drainage improvements, water rights, water lines, utilities, streets, alleys, right-of-way, easements. So this is another one of our gross receipts tax in, transfer out fund. As you can see, the money that's being transferred out of here is for the sample stations projects, and it'll be carried over if it's not complete. Page 90 is the Economic Development Fund. So this is funded by gross receipts tax that is currently set to sunset in December of 2025. It currently it's budgeted to bring in $1.1 million for FY25. The salaries and benefits that comes out of here, we already discussed that. That's half of the assistant city manager's salary. The other fees we have, that's the gross receipts tax admin fee. And then as you can see for FY24, we had the other, that's the LIDA that was approved for Learn New Mexico. Obviously, if that's not, whatever portion of that is not completed, that would carry over since that's been an approved project from the commission. Page 91, so this is Fund 109. This is the gross receipts tax for the capital outlay to fix municipal roads. This is one of our bigger capital gross receipts tax funds. It's slated to bring in $4.6 million of gross receipts tax for FY25. As we talked about when we looked at the recap, it also has a very healthy fund balance. The short-term plan for this is, along with the money from Fund 81, is to be able to get the SMP or the street maintenance program back up and going. The design has been completed for Oregon. They're working on some more design up in the Granada Hills area. So we have fund balance. We have a plan to spend it. At this point, we did not budget anything in that for FY25 because, as you guys are aware, there's a water issue that's coming in front of you on May 28th that will determine kind of the next steps in that budgeting process. Fund 109 also pays debt service, and so that's what the transfer out there is for the debt service. Okay. Page 92, the sidewalk revolving fund. So this fund has actually been closed. We took the fund balance that was available and we transferred it to pay some of our leveraging for the CDBG project. So the CDBG project was a sidewalk project. We felt that it met the definition, so this will actually not have a budget for FY25, as it also won't have a cash balance in FY25. Fund 93, this is, or Fund 93, page 93 for Fund 119. This is for the 2022 GRT revenue bond that was enacted for quality of life improvements. We are still spending out a little bit of cash that we have left that's kind of left over from the interest. This is what is funding the pickleball court, and it's funded some of the other improvements. So depending on where we're at the end of the fiscal year, we might have some cash that we need to carry over. But at this point, hopefully, we'll be able to close this fund at the end of the year. Page 94, same thing with Fund 121. We're looking at what we can transfer this money out to so that we can go ahead and close the Fund Center GO bond. So we're working on looking at what we can transfer that, but we'll have it transferred before the end of the fiscal year. And that's the same thing with page 95, which is the streets bond from 2014 as well. Same thing, we're looking into what we can transfer that money to, and we'll transfer it before the end of the year. So then page 96 is the American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARPA, or the SLFRF, I think is what the auditors call it, the State and Local Federal Revolving Fund. So it's got like 5 different names. So this is the money that we received from the federal government to address the 4 impacts that are listed there. So currently, it's budgeted for several projects. The biggest one, obviously, is the tank rehab that many of you saw on the first water tour. That is being funded completely out of here. It's accounting for about $4.7 million. We're also funding the water and sewer IT upgrades, especially for some of the more remote locations. That funding is coming out of here. We are funding an upgrade to the broadband and wireless service at the zoo to be able to allow them to have better connectivity and allow the patrons in that area to have better connectivity. And we did fund some utility assistance payments out of here. So whatever is not spent at the end of FY24 will carry over to FY25. We do have to have this money completely obligated by December 31st of 2024. We can still spend it. We still have another 2 years to spend it after that, but we have to have it under contract or under a purchase order by December 31st.
How much of it isn't spent yet?
How much of it is expended?
You said there was like 4 million or 4 point whatever towards the tax.
That's obligated. It's not completely expended, but it might as well be because it's going.
Yeah.
What's left?
What's left, actually, is what my question was. After the tanks and the broadband at the zoo.
After the tanks and the broadband and everything, nothing will be left. Because it's all budgeted in those projects. We probably have right now, we have the majority of it still in cash. Obligated, we still need to obligate about 2 million of it total.
So
But there is
broadband.
another tank project that's slated for it, along with the IT upgrades.
IT upgrades gonna cost that much, or?
Some of them will. Because some of them are pretty remote. Okay, that is it for capital. Does anybody have any questions on capital? Okay, we're going to move on to debt service. So debt service, we have 3 different funds that make up our debt service funds. We have Fund 53. Currently has 3 bonds in it. The 2014A, the 2014B, and the 2017. So those, like we talked about, are paid with our property tax. We have Fund 59, which is our loans that are paid for with gross receipts tax. So right now, we currently have 5 loans. Most of those are for streets, flood control, and then, of course, we have the 2 that we refunded. And then we have Fund 82, which is our water and sewer, and that currently has 9 loans that are being paid for various different things, but obviously the RO facility was a big one, Bonita Lake was a big one, and then there's other projects that are in there. So looking at the recaps for this, obviously kind of similar to what we talked about with the internal services. We're not trying to make money on the debt service funds. Our biggest goal is we need to cover the debt service that we agreed to. So we do that with, like I said, Fund 53. We do that with the property tax. Fund 59 and Fund 82, we do that with transfers in. Fund 59 gets transfers in from 3 GRT funds. Fund 82 gets transfers in from Fund 49 and Fund 81. So if you look on page 98 of your book, so this is the revenue and transfers in recap. So as you can see, property taxes, like we talked about, 1.2 million is what we expect to get into Fund 53. Then we have our transfers in, 42, 69, and 109 go to Fund 59. 49 and 81 go to Fund 82. So some little numbers, some big numbers. But all in all, our debt service from our gross receipts debt service costs us about $4.2 million a year. Our property tax is about 1.2.
Any questions?
I combine them all together. So page 99 gives you a breakdown of 53. Again, debt's pretty straightforward. We signed the agreements. We kind of got to do it. Same thing, page 100 gives you the breakdown of Fund 59, and page 101 gives you the breakdown of Fund 82. All right, so let's talk about our enterprise funds. So our enterprise funds are the funds where the majority of the expenditures should be covered by user fees that are charged to the users of the operations or of the property. That's great in theory. In practice, the golf course and the airport both require a transfer in from the general fund to be able to balance their budget. So the user fees that they charge, both of those are not enough to cover their expenditures. So while they're still technically enterprise funds, they are subsidized enterprise funds. But as you can see, water, sewer, solid waste collection, which is the convenience center, and then of course the Otero County Green Tree landfill, they charge enough in their user fees to cover their expenditures. So going for FY25, as you can see what we were talking about earlier with Fund 94, so they're slated to start the year with $2.6 million in cash. They're slated to end FY25 with $2.2 million in cash. Their reserves that they're required to keep are about 2.1 for their operating, their post-closure, and their equipment. So they are not really in line for FY25 to be doing a rebate, something that some of you commissioners have seen before. It's not so much in the cards for them for FY25. So going to page 103. This has the summary of the fees, the revenues for the enterprise funds. As you can see, like it should with enterprise funds, the majority of the revenue comes from user fees. We're budgeted at 19.7. This will need to be adjusted if we end up passing the rate proposal that we're going to bring in front of you on May 28th. This does not include that in its entirety. The transfer in is what we recently discussed about the golf course and the airport needing that to go ahead and balance. So that's a $1.1 million transfer in from the general fund. And we'll talk about individual revenues when we look at their individual sheets. And then, of course, here's their expenditures. So then if we go to page 104, so this is our summary page for Fund 81, which is our water sewer fund. Again, user fees, $13.8 million is what is currently budgeted. They are receiving a transfer in from 49 and from 89. Both of those are for capital. And then transfers out the $716,000 to the internal service fund, and then the $1.3 million is the transfer out to the pay the debt service in Fund 82. So,
What did you say the big increase in the user fees is?
so
Are you
we
taking into account?
we
the
took
rate?
into account a little bit of it, but we did not take into account fully what we're bringing forward.
Like 50% of it or 30%?
Not even that. We took into account, I think we added 0.5%.
0.5%? Based off of what we looked at the other day? That increase?
So that number will have to be retooled based on what passes. So page 105 is just kind of a breakdown. Like I said, this was the summary. This is the breakdown of the expenditures of the 9 departments that are going to make up Fund 81. So page 106. So this is the enterprise fund part of Bonito Lake. So this is not the campground. This is just the water production. So right now, the capital that's in there is still left over from the restoration project and the dam project. Obviously, whatever is not completed from it will carry over. The other thing that I need to point out here is we will have a correction on the final budget. We should have included utilities in the FY24 and the FY25 budget. We have since corrected it in the FY24 budget, but we'll have to bring it back in the final budget for FY25. Actually, in the preliminary budget. We'll bring it back when we vote on it on the 28th. So page 107 is central receiving. So this is Department 1602. So this is central receiving, the warehouse. The bulk of the items that are stored at the warehouse are for the water sewer maintenance and production. So the majority of those expenditures are booked in Fund 81. The biggest change in this budget was the change in other, and that was from the change in the damaged and obsolete. We talked about that earlier, about how we have to write off damaged and obsolete parts. We had a bunch last year that had gone obsolete that we needed to get them off the books. So that was a much higher number in FY24 than it's going to be in FY25 because we did some cleanup with all of that. Okay, page 108 is the expenses for the customer service or utility billing portion of 81. The change in the salary and benefits, you talked about the fact that we had employees kind of scattered all over the place. So we made sure we moved the customer service representatives over here to make everything more consistent. So that was the big change there. The change in supplies, the increase was in meters. We've been putting more meters in the ground and meters have gotten more expensive. So that was the increase in supplies. And then the decrease in capital is, again, one of those carryover situations. We've been putting $300,000 in the meter replacement project for the last couple of years to continue and try and build that up because we know our meters are aging. Most of them are already at least 8 years. Some of them are 10 years old. And we're going to need to start looking into replacing those. So we've kind of been saving up for that over the last couple of years. So anything that's not spent in FY24 will carry over to FY25 and add to that $300,000 that's already in there.
Hard to believe those meters are that old already.
I know, right? Time flies. Okay, on to page 110. This is the admin services for utilities. So this covers portion of the utilities director's salary, a portion of the executive assistant for utilities, portion of the safety coordinator. So the biggest change here is in services. Every year we recalculate the admin fee for that utilities pays the general fund. So this year we did the allocation. It was substantially less than it had been in previous years. Partially, some of that is the expenditures in those administrative departments were less, so we didn't need as large of an allocation. So that's really the biggest change in the admin. Page 111 is utility maintenance. So utility maintenance, again, is another one of those departments where we're always having to budget vacant positions and trying to massage the health benefit number around. So the health benefits came in a little bit less. So they saw an increase in their supplies. The biggest part of that increase was in the construction supplies. It went from $262,000 to $300,000. As you guys all saw the presentation a couple weeks ago, nothing's going down, everything's going up. So that's a direct byproduct of that. Services are seeing a decrease. That was mostly out of contract services. They had some stuff that was in FY24 that was kind of one time. And then, of course, any of the capital that is not completed in FY24, which for the most part for them was all equipment. If that equipment hasn't been received or paid for, it'll carry over to FY25. We're still kind of going through equipment purgatory. We've got some things that have been delivered, but we still have a lot of things that we're just still waiting on. Okay, page 112 is the wastewater treatment plant, Department 5603. Their increase in salary and benefits is they are the next department we have that were approved for new positions. So they were actually approved for 3 new positions, the senior lab analyst, the water quality lab technician, and the senior plant operator. The idea with that is bringing those positions in-house will allow us to cancel the contract services account that we have for that testing. That contract has been unreliable. They've been difficult to get good results out of, and so if we bring it in-house, we can control the quality ourselves. The increase that you're seeing in services, the majority of that comes in contract services. So they were given money to get some designs done on some of their stuff. So that, and some of the stuff that not necessarily ready for capital right now, but could be in the future.
How old is the plant?
How old is the wastewater plant?
Some of it dates back to 78, but the most current upgrade went live in 2012.
Do we have any plans for any future upgrades?
Actually, in the program that we discussed the other day, as part of rates, we've got phase 4 and 5 included in that. Improving the headworks and changing out the contact chamber and flood basins.
And you'll see that they were approved $400,000 to start the headworks redesign.
Any more questions?
Okay, page 113. This is for the water filter plant, water filter division, which is mostly based in La Luz. As you can see, same sort of thing. They have a lot of vacant positions, so we're always reprojecting that. Their biggest change comes in services, and that number came out of their contract services. They have some plans and some other things that are in there, same sort of thing, will carry over if they're not completed. A big portion of them hopefully will be completed this year. So that'll allow them to have a lower contract services number. They were awarded $240,000 in the capital process for new capital, Alamo Springs rehab design to redesign some of the spring cans and things that are
Did we
older.
get the lining fixed out there?
What do you think?
Did we get the lining fixed out there?
No, we currently have that under design as well. We should have the final design in November. Livingston Associates are working on that. Through the design of the cover, we're discovering that we're gonna have to replace a complete tower to the original structure that was installed in '54.
Is that the one that was wind damaged
No, this
from a
is,
couple years ago?
well, we got that one repaired. This is the south reservoir right now. And that's some of the original metallocene that was put in the early '90s. Some of the original cover.
And the tower is bad. You can see the rebar, like the tower is really bad.
Y'all took it.
Right?
It was bad.
Yeah.
Plenty of life left.
Any more questions?
Okay, page 114. So this is the water and sewer capital projects part of 81. This mostly has been reserved in the past for SMP projects, but we do have a couple of water sewer improvement projects we have going on right now that are in FY24. And then this does, we also include $200,000 for water line improvement here as well, to go along with the other $200,000 that we keep.
No questions?
Okay, page 115. So this is the solid waste collection system. This is Fund 86. And this is for the operation of the Solid Waste Disposal Convenience Center, which is also the Lavelle Station. So this is funded with user fees that are charged through the utility bills, so through the water bills. And this is also, though, where the expense for Southwest Disposal comes out of. So that is the large number that's in services. Their contract goes up every year, so that's one of the reasons that you see the increase there. For capital outlay, they're waiting on some pieces of equipment, so hopefully that will get delivered soon. If not, it'll roll over to FY25. And their decrease in maintenance is a decrease in communications maintenance because we had some projects in there for FY24 that we won't have to carry over for FY25. Okay. Page 117 is Fund 88, which is the Bonito Lake Campground Fund. So we had earlier the water production part of Bonito Lake, so this is the campground part of Bonito Lake. As you can tell, as it has recovered more and more from the fire, we've added more and more to the budget. So there's some additional items that have been added to the budget for this year. The money that is in other is a contingencies line, a $50,000 contingency line, a $20,000 equipment line, and $10,000 fuel line. For those of you that were on the tour on Friday, kind of understand that there's a ton of work to be done out there, but there's also still a ton of planning to be done out there. And so 88's a little hard because 88 has, it's not on here, so I skipped. I will have to look at the fund balance. I want to say 88 has about 177,000. Do you have that fund balance?
We don't charge to use the campground, correct? Or do we?
We did charge to use the campground when the campground was open, but it's not open. It hasn't been open in 11 years. But yes, I think it was like $4. Yeah. So it's slated to start FY25 with 375,000. So, like I said, as you saw, 375,000 wouldn't get real far. But I know City Manager Holden has been working with Community or Parks and Recreation Director Bass to work on a plan so that if there's something that jumps out at him, we'll be able to come back and do revisions to start spending that fund balance. But as you know, that's going to be one of the funding challenges coming up in the future is how do we fund the revitalization of the campground? And hopefully, you know, there's lots of opportunities for grants, and I know both Debbie and Bindi have been working really hard to identify those and apply for those, but it's going to be a major decision factor in the future. For FY25, this is, you know, kind of the basic budget that we included, with knowing that as plans get approved, we can come back and ask for revisions.
When it was open, like, what was the usage average?
I don't know. I don't think there's anybody still here that was there. I mean, Dave Busick would be the one who could answer that. He was the last caretaker up there. But that was always something we struggled with, was the record keeping at Bonito Lake. We had a huge audit finding one year because the auditors went up there to do their internal control, and they found like $25,000 worth of cash in the safe because they hadn't been taking it to the bank. So then we started having a finance employee drive up there every other day and take the deposits to the bank. So I couldn't even tell you if there's good records for that.
I think they all burnt in the fire too.
What do you think, Ronnie? Yeah, I don't think we even have.
I think the whole building
Yeah.
burnt down when it burned up.
I mean, we lost a lot in the fire. About the only thing that I would be able to give you is I would be able to go back and look at the general ledger and tell you what the revenue on the general ledger was.
I think we subsidized that quite a bit up there still.
It's very possible. I mean, looking at what the rates were even for 11 years ago, you know, they weren't necessarily going to stand up to what I'm sure the costs were.
No more questions?
Okay, page 118 is Fund 90. So that is the Desert Lake Golf Course Operational Fund. So the user fees, as you guys know, these are the user fees that Grant collects. We deposit them all, and then he has a revenue share of, you know, a certain percentage of those depending on what fees they are, versus, you know, green fees versus the 19th hole and everything like that. So the 1.7 million is what is projected for FY25. We do have the transfer in at the 415,000 from the general fund to go ahead and balance it. For supplies, they did see an increase on their, we made some changes. We updated some of the descriptions. So they now have a fertilizer and herbicide, a ground supplies, irrigation supplies, and irrigation chemicals. So before, where they had 2 supply lines, one for program and one for chemicals, now they have 6 supply lines that have it broken out a little bit more. So that's where the increase there. Obviously, you know, the biggest increase is to the services. The services increase comes mostly through the increase of grants revenue share, trying to balance that and trying to make sure that that ties in line with what we have signed on the contract. And then their other increases were pretty minimal, but those are the biggest ones. Their increase in maintenance was kind of spread out over equipment and fire systems and some building and structures.
When's the last time we did a rate increase out there?
So I know Stephanie and City Manager Holden just met with Grant because the contract is going to have to be rebid next year.
Yes, it'll be coming up next year, so we're already starting to come up with some options that we'll be presenting to you fairly quickly on which direction we need to go, as Grant does indicate that he may be ready to move on after that. And so there's got to be some options on how we go as a city with the golf course. So those will be coming to you very soon.
I just remember we used to subsidize $175,000 a year, and we're at $415,000 a year. That's a huge increase.
Yeah, I've never, seen a golf course, a municipal golf course that actually made money. So it's fairly common for a subsidy like this to make it work. And quite frankly, it requires a lot of maintenance in order to get that golf course up to the conditions that it needs to be at to attract people into the community and just to have a lot of play out there. So that's always a debatable issue. There's no question about it.
2 years ago? How much of an increase do we remember?
It wasn't much.
I don't think it was very much.
Maybe 25 cents it wasn't much.
I'm just looking at the water rate increase we're fixing to look at versus, I'm not a golfer, so I don't know, but, in my eyes, that's a luxury, not a necessity, and,
Oh, Lord, don't tell a golfer that.
well,
You're sitting between two of them up there now.
Take that club and
I
beat
say
you
you're
over the
sitting
head
between
with
two
it.
of them right there now.
you know what I mean? If it means running water or whether they can golf,
That's why the commission gets to decide those things, but there will be some discussion and a lot of options for you to consider as we move closer to move into a different contract type situation than what we have right now. So there'll be a lot of
Is there any other parties
discussion.
interested in bidding the contract, I'm assuming, or?
I don't know yet who's going to. You're going to have similar options to what you have with the other building out there. Is either the city runs it, or you contract another group, or you get rid of it. That's
Oh, God.
kind of the options.
I think he's trying to get us all kicked out of office.
Trying to get us all
us all
shot.
recalled.
is what he's trying to do. Can you imagine? Holy cow.
It's all recalled. We'll all be
Place would
kicked
be
out of
busting
office.
at the seam. No, we can't get rid of the golf course. Sorry, people.
Y'all two better get him up there and visit up there.
I guess even, what did you say the other day? Carrizozo had a golf course or something? Hey, look, if Carrizozo has a golf course, we have to have a
there's
golf
closed.
course.
They're not using it.
We were looking at buying.
We just-
Well, you
we just drove by
knocked
it.
Erie out of the water.
We were looking at buying the water rights at one time about 10, 12 years ago. They
Okay.
couldn't make it. But TRC has two of them.
I
over
do
there.
actually think I remember you saying that they were closed. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter because there's no way we can get rid of the golf course, so. And I'm not a golfer either. I'm right there with you, but whatever.
All right, page 120. We'll go from the golf course to the airport. So this is Fund 91, the White Sands Regional Airport. So as you can see, the revenue from the user fees, we have an expected increase in that. There is a decrease in the grants because, again, if the grant isn't finished, we'll carry it over. That's some money we receive from the state. There is a transfer in to be able to balance the fund. Obviously, the biggest change is the services. Again, that's where the expense for that grant to do the master plan, the airport master plan that's being currently worked on. And then everything else, had a decrease except for other. The increase in other mostly comes from an increase in equipment. The golf course, for a long time, has had to do with very minimal equipment. So we're trying to get them caught up and get them some flat monitors and not some bubble monitors. And then also, they were also granted a contingency line to be able to cover some unexpected stuff, because they definitely have some unexpected stuff out there as well. So, any questions on the airport?
Any questions? We all got an education recently on the airport.
Of course you did. Okay, page 122 is the Otero Green-Tree Regional Landfill. So this, of course, has already been voted on by their board. It's been voted on by the Green-Tree Board. It's been voted on by the Otero County Board. So as you can see, still kind of the same thing that we do every year. We're very conservative with our user fees, and then we reproject them in the middle of the year, mostly because we never know what asbestos is going to do, because it's all dependent on how many jobs they have where they're tearing out asbestos, which is really the big money maker for the landfill. They don't have too many changes in their budget. Kind of the biggest one is a change in services. And that's just mostly due to some changes in the allocations for their internal services. That's really the biggest change. And then some individual one-time expenditures that they had in FY24 as well. They don't currently have any capital planned for FY25. However, they're probably going to be bringing some revisions forward. There's some stuff that they want to do with some fencing, that they're in the process of getting that figured out. Okay, and that is it for enterprise funds. Does anybody have any questions on any of those? All right. So now the next one is super easy. These are trust and agency. These are the funds that we use either just for clearing purposes or for holding funds that we are then required later to send to the state. So that's like the state judicial. That's what it's used for. The payroll clearing, we use that when clearing our payroll expenses, utility deposits, pretty straightforward. Same thing with the core escrow account. We keep $1,000 in that just so we have it there in case we do start entering into another core project and we have to hold some money in escrow. So there's actually no expenditures, no revenues tied to these. They just exist as pass-throughs. And so there you can see there's the only one little thing is the state judicial, which is just the pass-through. All right. Are there any questions on any of the individual funds that we went through that we did not discuss that you would like to go back and discuss?
Anybody have any questions?
All right, let's talk gross receipts tax. Very quick gross receipts.
Sharon said, I don't want to go back.
You don't want to go back. We had a good discussion. It was lively. We learned a lot. All right, gross receipts tax. So here's where we are right now with our gross receipts tax. We're at 8.175%. You can kind of see the breakdown there that we're no longer required to present that breakdown to the state. The state only cares, was it passed by referendum? Was it not passed by referendum? So we still have that breakdown available there. So the total City of Alamogordo enacted tax is 2.3625. County has 0.8125, and then the state is 5%. That equals the 8.175. So what does that look like in terms of the last 5 years. So the bright green line that gets kind of out of control there, that was FY20. So we had a pretty big spike there because we had some corrections and things. FY21 is the turquoise line that runs a little bit above it. FY22 is that blue line that kind of runs through the middle. FY23 is the red line that's slightly above that. And FY24 is that orange line that's been running pretty good. We had a correction in January that came in that kind of bumped us up. And then, of course, May and June are averages because we don't have that information yet. So as you can see, our FY24 gross receipts tax has been pretty good. It's been above where other years have been. A little bit of a dip there in December, spike back up in January, and kind of right along the average. So all this, this shows that we're really confident in using the 3-year average to project our gross receipts tax. Cannabis gross receipts tax. So bright green line on the bottom is FY23. So you can see it kind of rolled along, and then it took a really big jump from March to April, which I believe is when the next increase stepped up. And then as you can see, that turquoise line starting July, it's, pretty level. We get about the same amount every month, right around $25,000, a little bit more, a little bit less, but for the most part, we're right about $25,000 a month. And so I believe it's supposed to take another jump here because I think it's supposed to go up for 5 years. So we should see another bump.
That's 300,000. That's about what you projected, right?
So it's pretty flat. I mean, it really doesn't fluctuate a whole lot. But it definitely, you can see the difference when they increase the rate. Okay, FY25 approved capital. So we've talked about most of these. This first part here is Fund 24. These are the state grant funding. So we've already talked about those. They're just listed there. Fund 32 received the money from Fund 69 to update the library fire alarm system. And the cemetery is receiving the transfer in from Fund 31 for the above ground installation. Fund 44 received $250,000 to design, I don't know if we talked about this one, to design the replacement of the 20-inch collapsed drainage that goes from the drop inlet on White Sands Boulevard at 10th Street and goes through the zoo and under the railroad tracks. It is not in good shape. So we need to get it designed. We need to figure out how much it's going to be for us to replace that because it's becoming a pressing concern. Fund 81, our usual $300,000 allocation that we've done each year. And then the projects to start redesigning the wastewater treatment plant headworks and the Alamo Springs area rehabilitation design. So that was the capital. We did not fund any capital equipment replacement. We really want to look into actually setting up a capital equipment replacement program instead of doing these little piecemeal things that we've been doing that haven't been working great for us. So staff is working on that and looking into it. And so we're hoping that in July, when we roll over the cash balances, we'll be able to also then provide a plan that's a little bit more sustaining rather than just kind of trickling along.
Didn't we have one of those about 10 years ago?
We had one that was based on the idea that we would be able to fund the replacement with the sale of the old vehicles. And it just wasn't close. We get like $1,500, and that doesn't, we can save up for 10 years and still not be able to buy a vehicle. Plus, I have reviewed that document, and I don't think it would work now because of such an increase in the prices of the vehicles. So we're going to have to figure something out that's supplemented with gross receipts tax.
Or capital outlay.
Or something, yeah. Although.
That's how we used to fund it before
All
it was
this-
capital outlay.
Yeah, but the state legislature has come back and basically told us, every year they tell us, police, don't get comfortable. We might not fund your vehicles. We don't want to fund vehicles. We want to fund brick and mortar. We want to fund buildings. We want to fund infrastructure. So far, they haven't turned down the police vehicles, but we have also not tried to go to them and request other equipment. Okay, FY25 approved positions. I believe we talked about all of these, but we'll talk about them here again. 3 firefighters for the fire department, a part-time recreation aide, a part-time seasonal summer cashier, and seasonal lifeguards. And then for the library maintenance technician, which will be pretty much completely absorbed by no longer having to pay for the cleaning contractor. And then under the water sewer fund, the senior plant operator, the senior lab analyst, and the water quality lab technician, can no longer read. So these are the new positions that were added in this budget. So that's 10 total positions. And that's it. Questions?
How many water user accounts do we have nowadays? It used to be around 13,000,
It's
but
about 13,500
13.5.
the last time that we pulled the data.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to tell you that you did an outstanding job.
Oh, thank you.
You have a lot of information, and I rode on the bus, and the history that you have, not only you, but Dave and the other people that were on the bus, you really take I want to say this, I said you take a lot of care, and you really do a lot of research, and really try to give us some good information, so I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that my bus personality does not color your opinion of me.
I started saying they're entertaining, too.
They have too much fun.
Hey, and I didn't get car sick. All right, well, if you guys have no more questions, I don't have any more information for you tonight.
Good job, thank you.
Thank you. And of course, you know where to find us anytime. You know, if anything comes up, we'll bring it back to vote on the 28th. So, you know, any questions in between there and now, you know where we are. Except for next week, I'm going to be in Vegas, so.
Nobody
Yes,
else
send me
has
an
any
email.
questions? Okay, if not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A motion from Mayor Pro Tem McDonald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who said that? A second from Commissioner Burnett. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.